Chapter 18 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 18. When the colonel of the Sussex Rangers woke on the following morning, the Umfraville element in him, fatigued doubtless with the demands of the previous day, still slept on. That strain in him which had made his maternal ancestors gentlemen adventurers in Tudor times, and cavaliers in the days of Charles I, and Jacobites with James II, and roisterers with George IV, loyal, swashbuckling, and impractical, daring, dashing, lovable, absurd, bound to come to grief one day or another, as they had come, that strain lying dormant, Ashley was free to wake in the spirit of the manufacturer of brushes. In other words, he woke in alarm. It was very real alarm. It was alarm not unlike that of the gambler who realizes in the cold stare of morning that for a night's excitement he has thrown away a fortune. The feeling was so dreadful that as he lay for a few minutes with his eyes closed, he could say without exaggeration that he had never felt anything so sickening in his life. It was worse than the blue funk that attended the reveille for his first battle, worse than the bluer remorse that had come with the dawn after some of his more youthful sprees. The only parallel to it he could find was in the desolation of poor creatures he had seen, chiefly in India, reduced suddenly by fire, flood, or earthquake to the skin they stood in and a lodging on the ground. His swaggering promises of yesterday had brought him as near as possible to that. Fortunately, when he had sprung out of bed, the feeling became less poignant. By the time he had had his bath and his breakfast, it had got itself within the limits of what could be expressed in the statement, "I've been a jolly ass." Though there was no denying this fact, he could nevertheless use the reproach in its precise signification. He was not a jolly ass because he had remained true to Olivia Guion, but because of the extravagant methods of his faithfulness. No one but an Umfraville, he declared, would have hesitated to accept the status quo. Considering that in spite of everything he was still eager to give Olivia the shelter of his name and the advantages of his position, his insistence on doing more fell short of the grotesque. Nevertheless, he had insisted on it, and it was too late to shrink from making good his offer. No doubt, if he did so shrink, Olivia would commend him, but it would be a commendation not inconsistent with a fall in her esteem. His nerves still tingled with the joy of hearing her say, as she had said yesterday, "You're the noblest man in the world. I never dreamed there could be anyone like you." She was so sparing with her words that these meant more from her than from another. If she used them, it was because she thought he was the noblest man in the world, and because he did surpass her dreams. This was setting up the standard in a way that permitted no falling short of it. He must be Rupert Ashley at his best, even if the world went to pieces while he made the attempt. Moreover, if he failed, there was always Peter Davenant ready to loom up above him. "I must keep higher than him," he said to himself, "whatever it costs me." So, little by little, the Umfraville in him also woke with its daredevil chivalry. It might be said to have urged him on, while the Ashley prudence held him back, when from his room in the hotel he communicated by telephone with Olivia, begging her to arrange an interview between Guion and himself about 11 o'clock. On taking the message to her father, Olivia found him awake, but still in bed. Since his downfall had become generally known, she had noticed a reluctance on his part to get up. It was true he was not well, but his shrinking from activity was beyond what his degree of illness warranted. It was a day or two before she learned to view this seeming indolence as nothing but the desire to creep for as many hours as possible out of the 24 into the only refuge left to him. In his bed he was comparatively safe, not from the law, which he no longer had to fear, but from intrusion and inspection, and above all, from sympathy. It was between 9 and 10 o'clock. The blinds were up, the windows open, and the sunshine was streaming in. A tray with his scarcely tasted breakfast on it stood beside the bed. Guion lay on his back, his head sunk deep into the pillows. Though his face was turned from the door and his eyes closed, Olivia knew he was not sleeping. After performing small tasks in the room, carrying the breakfast tray into the hall and lowering the blinds, she sat down at the bedside. "Papa, darling?" As he turned his head slowly, she thought his eyes had the look of mortal ennui that Rembrandt depicts in those of Lazarus rising from the tomb and coming back to life. She delivered her message, to which he replied, "He can come." "I think I ought to tell you," she continued, "what he's coming for." She gave him the gist of her conversation with Ashley on the previous day, and the one great decision to which they had led him up. It would have gratified Ashley, could he have overheard, to note the skill with which she conveyed precisely that quality of noble precipitancy in his words and resolutions which he himself feared they had lacked. If a slight suspicion could have risen in his mind, it would have been that of a certain haste on her part to forestall any possible questioning of his eagerness such as he had occasion to observe in himself. That might have wounded him. "So he wants to go ahead," Guion said, when she had finished. "Apparently." "Can't he do that and still leave things as they are?" "He seems to think he can't." "I don't see why. If I have to owe the money to anyone, I'd rather owe it to Davenant." "So should I." "Do you really want to marry him?" The question startled her. "Marry him? Who?" There was a look almost of humour in Guion's forlorn eyes. "Well, I didn't mean Davenant. I didn't suppose there was any—" "Papa, darling," she hastened to say, "as things are at present, I'd rather not marry anyone at all. There's so much for me to do in getting life on another footing for us both that marriage seems to belong to another kind of world." He raised himself on his elbow, turning towards her. "Then why don't you tell him so?" "I have, but he won't take that as a reason. And besides, I've said I would marry him if he'd give up this wild project." "But you're in love with him, aren't you? You may as well tell me," he continued, as she coloured. "I must have some data to go on." I was in love with him," she faltered. "I suppose I am still, but while everything is as it is, I can't tell. I don't know. I'm feeling so many other things that I don't know whether I feel love or not. I dare say I do, but it's like asking a man if he's fond of playing a certain game when he thinks he's going to die." He slipped down into bed again, pulling the coverlet about his chin and turning his face away. As he said nothing more, she rose to go. "About 11 then, Papa dear?" She could hear a muffled assent as she left the room. She was afraid he was crying. Nevertheless, when she had gone, Guion rang for Reynolds and made his usual careful toilet with uncommon elaboration. By the time his guest arrived, he was brushed and curled and stretched on the couch. If he had in the back of his mind a hope of impressing Ashley and showing him that if he, Guion, had fallen, it was from a height, he couldn't help it. To be impressive was the habit of his life, a habit it was too late now to overcome. Had he taken the strange ride with Morrowby Jukes, he would have been impressive among the living dead. Curiously enough, too, now that the possibility was past, he wondered if he didn't regret it. He confessed as much to Ashley. "I know what you've come for," he said, when Ashley, who had declined a cigar, seated himself beside the couch. "That means, I suppose, that Olivia has got ahead of me." "She told me what you proposed. It's very fine, very sporting." "I haven't proposed it because it's either sporting or fine. It seems to me the only thing to do." "Yes, I can understand that you should feel so about it. I should myself if I were in your place and had a right to be generous. The trouble is that it wouldn't work." Ashley would have given much not to feel this sudden exhilaration of relief. It was so glowing that in spite of his repugnance he could have leaned forward and wrung Guion's hand. He contrived, however, to throw a tone of objection into his voice as he said, "Wouldn't work? Why not?" Guion raised himself on his elbow. "It's no use going over the arguments as to the effect on your position. You've considered all that, no doubt, and feel that you can meet it. Whether you could or not, when it came to the point, is another question. But no matter. There are one or two things you haven't considered. I hate to put them before you, but because you're a fine fellow, and it's too bad that you should be in this fix. It's part of my chastisement to have put you there. But it'll be something to me, some alleviation, if you can understand, to help to get you out." Ashley was dumb. He was also uncomfortable. He hated this sort of thing. Guion continued. "Suppose I were to let you go ahead on this, let you raise the money and take it from you, and pay Davenant and all that. Then you might marry my daughter and get life on some sort of tolerable working basis, I dare say." He pulled himself forward on the couch. Ashley noted the blazing of his eyes and hectic colour in his cheeks. You might even be happy in a way," he went on, "if you didn't have me." "Didn't have you? I don't understand." "And you'd have me. You couldn't get out of it. I'm done for. I'm no good to anyone any more. But I'm not going to die. That's my point. That's my punishment, too. Can't you imagine what it means to a man like me, who used to think well of himself, who's been well thought of? Can't you imagine what it is to have to inspire everyone who belongs to him with loathing? That's what I've got to do for the rest of my life. And I'm going to live. Oh, I say. You may believe it, Ashley, but I'd rather have been shut up, put away, where people couldn't see me, where I didn't have to see them. You know Olivia and I were facing that. I expect she's told you. Upon my soul, there's so many ways in which it would have been easier than this. That's not what I'm coming to. The great fact is that after you've counted your cost and done your utmost to still have me, like a dead rat, strung round your neck, oh, I say, by Jove! Olivia, poor child, has to bear it. She can, too. It's a remarkable thing about us New England people, our grit in the face of disgrace. I fancy there are many of our women who'd be as plucky as she, and I know one man. I don't know any others. Ashley felt sick. He never in his life felt such repulsion as toward what seemed to him this facile, theatrical remorse. If Guion was really contrite, if he really wanted to relieve the world of his present, he could blow his brains out. Ashley had known, or known of, so many had resorted to this ready remedy for a desperate plight, that it seemed simple. His thoughts were too complex, however, for immediate expression, and before he could decide what to respond, Guion said, "Why don't you give him a chance?" Ashley was startled. "Chance? What chance? Who?" "Davenant." Ashley grasped the back of his chair as they were about to spring up. "What's he want a chance for? Chance for what?" "I might have said, why don't you give her a chance? She's half in love with him, as it is." "That's a lie. That's an infernal lie." Ashley was on his feet. He pushed the chair from him, though he still grasped it. He seemed to need it for support. Guion showed no resentment, continuing to speak with feverish quiet. "I think you'll find that the whole thing is predestined, Ashley. Davenant's coming to my aid is what you might call a miracle. I don't like to use the expression. It sounds idiotic, and canting and all that, but as a matter of fact he came as an answer to prayer." Ashley gave a snort of impatience. Guion warmed to his subject, dragging himself farther up on the couch and throwing the coverlet from his knees. "Yes, of course you'd feel that way about it, naturally. So should I if anybody else were to tell me. But this is how it happened. One night, not long ago, while you were on the water, I was so hard hit that I actually prayed. I don't know that I ever did before, that is, not really pray. But I did then, and I didn't beat about the bush either. I didn't stop at half measures. I asked for a miracle right out and out, and I got it. The next morning Davenant came with his offer of the money. You may make what you like out of that, but I make this, by Jove, that you and he entered into a bargain that he should supply the cash, and you should—" "Wrong." With his arm stretched to its full length, he pointed his forefinger up into Ashley's face. "Wrong!" he cried again. "I asked him if he had anything to do with it, and he said he hadn't." "Well, would you expect him to acknowledge it? He might deny it till he damned his soul with lies, but that wouldn't keep you and him from—" "Before God, Ashley, I never thought of it till later. I know it looks that way, the way you put it, but I never thought of it till later. I dragged it out of him that he'd once been in love with her and had asked her to marry him. That was a regular knock-down surprise to me. I'd had no idea of anything of the kind. But he said he wasn't in love with her any longer. I dare say he thinks he isn't, but suppose he is, that needn't affect her, except as an impertinence. A woman can defend herself against that sort of thing, by Jove." "It needn't affect her, only as a matter of fact, it does. It appeals to her imagination. The big scale of the thing would impress almost any woman. Look here, Ashley," he cried, with a touch of hysteria, "it'll be better for us all in the long run if you'll give him a chance. It'll be better for you than for anyone else. You'll be well out of it. Any impartial person would tell you that. You must see it yourself. You do see it yourself. We're not your sort." But Ashley could stand it no longer. With a smothered, inarticulate oath, he turned abruptly and marched out of the room. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 19. Fortunately there was no one in the upper hall, nor on the stairs, nor in the lower hall, nor in the oval room into which Ashley stumbled his way. The house was all sunshine and silence. He dropped into the nearest armchair. "It's a lie," he kept repeating to himself. "It's a lie. It's a damned infernal lie. It's a put-up job between them, between the old scoundrel and that oaf." The reflection brought him comfort. By degrees it brought him a great deal of comfort. That was the explanation, of course. There was no need of his being panic-stricken. To frighten him off was part of their plan. Had he not challenged her 2 or 3 times to say she didn't care for him? If she had any doubt on the subject, he had given her ample opportunity to declare it. But she had not done so. On the contrary, she made him both positive and negative statements of her love. What more could he ask? He breathed again. The longer he thought of it, the better his situation seemed to grow. He had done all that an honourable man could think of. He had been chivalrous to a quixotic degree. If they had not accepted his generous proposals, then so much the worse for them. They, Guion and Davenant, were pursuing obstructionist tactics, so as to put him in a place where he could do nothing but retreat. Very well, he would show them. There were points beyond which even chivalry could not go, and if they found themselves tangled in their own barbed wire, they themselves would be to blame. So as the minute of foolish, jealous terror passed away, he began to enjoy the mellow peace of the old house. It was the first thing he had enjoyed since landing in America. His pleasure was largely in the anticipation of soon leaving that country with all the honours and Olivia Guion besides. It was a gratification to the Ashley spirits, too, to note how promptly the right thing had paid. It was really something to take to heart. The moral to be drawn from his experiences at the heights of Dargle had been illustrated over and over again in his career, and this was once more. If he had funked the sacrifice, it would have been on his conscience all the rest of his life. As it was, he had made it, or practically made it, and so could take his reward without scruple. He put this plainly before Olivia when at last she appeared. She came slowly through the hall from the direction of the dining-room, a blank book and a pencil in her hand. "I'm making an inventory," she explained. "You know that everything will have to be sold." He ignored this to hurry to his account of the interview with Guion. It had been brief, he said, and in a certain sense unsatisfactory. He had laid stress on his regret that her father should have seen fit to decline his offer. That's what it amounted to. But he pointed out to her that bounder, Davenant, who had doubtless counselled this refusal, would now be the victim of his own wiles. He had overreached himself. He had taken one of those desperate risks to which the American speculative spirit is so often tempted, and he had pushed it too far. He would lose everything now, and serve him right. "I've made my offer," he went on, in an injured tone, "and they've thrown it out. I really can't do more now, can I?" "You know already how I feel about that." They were still standing. He had been too eager to begin his report to offer her a chair or to take one himself. "They can't expect me to repeat it now, can they?" he hurried on. "There are limits, by Jove. I can't go begging to them." "I don't think they expect it." "And yet if I don't, you know, he's dished. He'll lose his money and everything else." And putting a slight emphasis on the concluding words, he watched her closely. She betrayed herself to the extent of throwing back her head with a little tilt to the chin. "I don't believe he'd consider that being dished. He's the sort of man who loses only when he flings away." "He's the sort of man who's a beastly cad." He regretted these words as soon as they were uttered, but she had stung him to the quick. Her next words did so again. "Then if so, I hope you won't find it necessary to repeat the information. I mistook him for something very high and noble, and if you don't mind, I'd rather go on doing it." She swept him with a look such as he knew she must be capable of giving, though he had never before seen it. The next second she had slipped between the portière into the hall. He heard her pause there. It was inevitable that Guion's words should return to him. "Half in love with him, as it is." "That's rot," he assured himself. He'd only to call up the image of Davenant's hulking figure and heavy ways to see what rot it was. He himself was not vain of his appearance. He had too much to his credit to be obliged to descend to that. But he knew he was a distinguished man, and that he looked it. The woman who could choose between him and Davenant would practically have no choice at all. That seemed to him conclusive. Nevertheless, it was with a view to settling this question beyond resurrection that he followed her into the hall. He found her standing with the notebook still in her hand. He came softly behind her and looked over her shoulder, his face close to hers. She could feel his breath on her cheek, but she tried to write. "I'm sorry I said what I did," he whispered. She stayed her pencil long enough to say, "I hope you're still sorrier for having thought it." "I'm sorry you know I think it, since it affects you so deeply." "It affects me deeply to see you can be unjust." "I'm more than unjust. Well, you can fancy what I am, when I say that I know someone who thinks you're more than half in love with this fellow, as it is." "Is that Papa?" "I don't see that it matters who it is. The only thing of importance is whether you are or not." "If you mean that as a question, I shall have to let you answer it yourself." "Would you tell me if you were?" "What would be the use of telling you a thing that would make you unhappy and that I couldn't help?" "Am I to understand, then, that you are half in love with him?" She continued the effort to write. "I think I've a right to press that question," he resumed. "Am I, or am I not, to understand—" She turned slowly. Her face was flushed, her eyes were misty. "You may understand this," she said, keeping her voice as much under control as possible. "You may understand this, that I don't know whom I'm in love with, or whether or not I'm in love with anyone. That's the best I can say. I'm sorry, Rupert, but I don't think it's altogether my fault. Papa's troubles seem to have transported me into a world where they neither marry nor are given in marriage, where the whole subject is alien to—" "But you said," he protested bitterly, "no longer ago than yesterday, that you loved me." "And I suppose I do. I did in Southsea. I did right up to the minute when I learned what Papa and I have been doing all these years, and that if the law had been put in force, you see, that's made me feel as if I were benumbed, as if I were frozen or dead. You mustn't blame me too much." "My darling, I'm not blaming you. I'm not such a duffer but that I can understand how you feel. It'll be all right. You'll come round. This is like an illness, by Jove. That's what it's like. But you'll get better, dear. After we're married, if you'll only marry me." "I said I'd do that, Rupert. I said it yesterday, if you'd give up what I understand you have given up." He was on his guard against admitting this. "I haven't given it up. They've made it impossible for me to do it. That's all. It's their action, not mine." "It comes to the same thing. I'm ready to keep my promise." "You don't say it with much enthusiasm." "Perhaps I say it with something better. I think I do. At the same time I wish—" "You wish what?" "I wish I had attached another condition to it." "It may be too late for that even now. Let's have it." "If I had thought of it," she said with a faint, uncertain smile, "I should have exacted a promise that you and he should be friends." He spoke sharply. "Who, me? That's a good one, by Jove. You may as well understand me, dear, once and for all. I don't make friends of cow-punchers of that sort." "I do," she said coldly, turning again to her notebook. It was not strange that Ashes should pass the remainder of the day in a state of irritation against what he called this American way of doing things. Neither was it strange that when, after dinner in the evening, Davenant kept close to him as they were leaving Rodney Temple's house, the act should have struck the Englishman as a bit of odious presumption. Having tried vainly to shake his companion off, he was obliged to submit to walking along the embankment with him, side by side. He had not found the dinner an entertaining event. Drusilla talked a great deal, but was uneasy and distrait. Rodney Temple seemed to him a queer old cove, while Mrs. Temple made no impression on him at all. Olivia had urged her inability to leave her father as an excuse for not coming. Davenant said little beyond giving the information that he was taking leave of his host and hostess to sleep that night in his old quarters in Boston, and proceed next day to Stoughton, Michigan. This fact gave him a pretext for saying good night when Ashley did, and leaving the house in his company. "We're going the same way, aren't we?" he asked as soon as they were outside. "No," Ashley said promptly. "You're taking the tram, and I shall walk." "I should like to walk too, Colonel, if you don't mind." Since silence raised the most telling objection, Ashley made no reply. Taking out his cigarette case, he lit a cigarette, without offering one to his companion. The discourtesy was significant, but Davenant ignored it, commenting on the extraordinary mildness of the October night, and giving items of information as to the normal behaviour of American autumn weather. As Ashley expressed no appreciation of these data, the subject was dropped. There was a long silence before Davenant nerved himself to begin on the topic he had sought this opportunity to broach. "You said yesterday, Colonel, that you'd like to pay me back the money I've advanced to Mr. Guion. I've just as soon you wouldn't, you know." Ashley deigned no answer. The tramp went on in silence, broken only by distant voices or a snatch of song from a student's clubhouse near the river. Somewhere in the direction of Brookline, a locomotive kept up a puffing like the beating of a pulse. "I don't need that money," Davenant began again. "There's more where it came from. I shall be out after it from tomorrow on." Ashley's silence was less from rudeness than from self-restraint. All his nerves were taut with the need to visit his troubles on someone's head. A soldiering life had not accustomed him to indefinite repression of his irritable impulses, and now, after 2 or 3 days of it, he was at the limit of his powers. It was partly because he knew his patience to be nearly at an end that he wanted it to be alone. He was also afraid of the blind fury with which Davenant's mere presence inspired him. While he expressed this fury to himself in epithets of scorn, he was aware, too, that there were shades of animosity in it for which he had no ready supply of terms. Such exclamatory fragments as forced themselves up through the troubled incoherence of his thoughts were of the nature of "damned American," "vulgar Yankee," "insolent bounder," rendering but inadequately the sentiments of a certain kind of Englishman towards his fancied typical American, a crafty colossus who accomplishes everything by money and brutal strength. Had there been nothing whatever to create a special antagonism between them, Ashley's feelings towards Davenant would surely have been that of a civilized Jack the Giant-killer towards a stupendous, uncouth foe. It would have had elements in it of fear, jealousy, even of admiration, making it its best for suspicion and neutrality, and at its worst for— But Davenant spoke again. "I'd a great deal rather, Colonel, that—" The very sound of his voice, with its harsh consonants and its absurd repetitions of the military title, grated insufferably on Ashley's ear. He was beyond himself, although he seemed cool. "My good fellow, I don't care a hang what you'd a great deal rather." Ashley lit a fresh cigarette with the end of the old one, throwing the stump into the river almost across Davenant's face, as the latter walked the nearer to the railing. The American turned slightly and looked down. The action, taken in conjunction with his height and size and his refusal to be moved, intensified Ashley's rage, which began now to round on himself. Even in the monotonous tramp of their footsteps, as the embankment became more deserted, got on his nerves. It was long before Davenant made a new attempt to fulfil his mission. "I'm sorry what I said just now," he began, in what he tried to make a reasonable tone. "I've no axe to grind for myself. If Miss Guion—" "We'll leave that name out," Ashley cried sharply. "Only a damn cad would introduce it." Though the movement with which Davenant swung his left arm through the darkness and with the back of his left hand struck Ashley on the mouth was so sudden as to surprise no one more than himself, it came with all the cumulative effect of 24 hours' brooding. The same might be said of the spring with which Ashley bounded on his adversary. It had the agility and strength of a leopard's. Before Davenant had time to realize what he had done, he found himself staggering, hurled against the iron railing, which threatened to give way beneath his weight. He had not taken breath when he was flung again. In the dim light of the electrics he could see the glare in Ashley's eyes and hear him panting. Davenant, too, panted, but his wrath that had flared up like a rocket had already come down like a stick. "Look here," he stammered, "we can't do this sort of thing." Ashley fell back. He too seemed to realize quickly the folly of the situation. When he spoke, it was less in anger than in protest. "By God, you struck me!" "I didn't know it, Colonel. If I did, we're quits on it because you insulted me." Perhaps you didn't know that. I'm willing to think you didn't. If you'd only believe that the whole thing has been a mistake, a damned, idiotic, tomfool mistake." The words had their effect. Ashley fell back still farther. There was a sinking of his head and a shrinking of his figure that told of a reaction from the moment of physical excess. A roadside bench was visible beneath an arc lamp but a few yards away. "Come and sit down," Davenant said hoarsely. He found it difficult to speak. Ashley stumbled along. He sat down heavily like a man spent with fatigue or drink. With his elbows on his knees, he hid his face in his hands while his body rocked. Davenant turned away, walking down the embankment. He walked on for 50 or 60 yards. He himself felt a curious sense of being battered and used up. His heart pounded and the perspiration stood on his brow. Putting his hand to his collar, he found his evening cravat awry and his waistcoat pulled out of shape. He grasped the rail, as if for support, looking off with unseeing eyes into the night. Lights along the riverside were reflected in the water. Here and there a bridge made a long, low arch of lamps. More lights sprinkled the suburban hills, making a fringe to the pall of stars. They grew pale, even while he looked at them, as before a brighter radiance, and he knew that behind him the moon was coming up. He thought of the moonrise of the previous evening, when Olivia Guion had walked with him to the gate and let her hand rest in his. He recalled her words, as he had recalled them 100 times that day. "The man I care for." He went back over each phase of their conversation as though it was something he was trying to learn by heart. He remembered her longing for her aunt de Moilcourt. All at once he struck the railing with the energy of a man who has a new inspiration. "By George!" he said half aloud. "That's an idea. That's certainly an idea. I wonder if... The Indiana sailed last week. It ought to be in the turn of the Louisiana the day after tomorrow. By George, I believe I could make it if..." He hurried back to the bench where Ashley was still sitting. The latter was upright now, his arms stretched along the back. He had lit a cigarette. Davenant approached to within a few feet. "Look here, Colonel," he said gently. "We've got to forget this evening." It was a minute or two before Ashley said, "What's the good of forgetting one thing when there are so many others to remember?" "Perhaps we can forget them too, one by one. I guess you haven't understood me. I dare say I haven't understood you either, though I think I could if you'd give me a chance. All I want to say is this, that I'm off." Ashley turned quickly. "Off? Where?" "Where we're not likely to meet, for some little time, again." "Oh, but I say, you can't—" "Can't what, Colonel?" "Can't drop out of the running, damn it all, man. You can't let it be a walk-over for me. After all, that's where you've made your mistake, Colonel, I guess. You thought there was a race, so to speak, and that I was in it. Well, I wasn't." "But what the deuce?" "I not only wasn't in it, but there was no race. There never was. It was a walk-over for someone, from the start. Now I guess I'll say good night." He turned away abruptly, but having taken a few steps, came back again. "Look here, let's have a cigarette." Ashley fumbled for his case, opened it, and held it up. "I say, take 2 or 3. As Ashley lifted the one he was smoking to serve as a light, Davenant noticed that the hand trembled and steadied it in the grasp of his own. "Thanks, and good night again," he said, briefly, as he strode finally away into the darkness. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 20. It was not till the motor had actually got out of Havre and was well along the dusty white road to the chateau that Davenant began to have misgivings. Up to that point the landmarks, and the sea marks, had been familiar. On board the Louisiana, in London, in Paris, even in Havre, he felt himself on his accustomed beat. On steamers or trains and in hotels he had that kind of confidence in himself which, failing him somewhat whenever he entered the precincts of domestic life, was sure to desert him altogether now, as he approached the strange and imposing. "Madame est à la campagne. A black-eyed old woman had told him so on the previous day. For the instant he was relieved, since it put off the moment of confronting the great lady a little longer. He had in fact rung the bell at the frowning portal in the Rue de l'Université with some trepidation. Suggestions of grandeur and mystery beyond anything he was prepared to meet lay within those seemingly fortified walls. At the same time it gave glory to the glamour in which the image of Olivia Guion always appeared to him, to think she had passed and repassed these solemn gates at will, and that the stately Louis XV hotel, of which the concierge allowed him a glimpse across the courtyard, had, on and off, been her home for years. It was one more detail that removed her beyond his sphere and made her inaccessible to his yearnings. From the obliging post-office clerk at the bank on which he drew, a gentleman posted in the movements of all distinguished Americans on the continent of Europe, he learned that La Campagne for the Marquise de Melchior meant the château of Melchior-le-Danois in the neighbourhood of Harfleur. He was informed, moreover, that by taking the 2 o'clock train to Havre he could sleep that night at the Hotel Frascati and motor out to Melchior easily within an hour in the morning. It began then to occur to him that what had presented itself at first as a prosaic journey from Boston to Paris and back was becoming an adventure, with a background of castles and noble dames. Nevertheless, he took heart for the run to Havre, and except for feeling at twilight the wistfulness that comes out of the Norman landscape, the melancholy of things forgotten but not gone, dead but still brooding, wraith-like over the valley of the Seine, haunting the hoary churches and the turreted chateau, and the windings of the river, and the long lines of poplar, and the villages and forests and orchards and cornfields. Except for this, his spirits were good. If now and then he was appalled at what he, a shy fellow with no antecedents to recommend him, and no persuasive powers, had undertaken, he thought of Olivia Guion. The thing he was attempting became trivial when compared with the possible benefits to her. That reflections, too, enabled him to come victoriously out of 3 long hours of inward wrestling. 3 long hours spent on the jetty which thrust itself into the sea just outside his hotel at Havre. He supposed he had already fought the battle with himself and won it. Its renewal on the part of powers within his soul took him by surprise. He had strolled out after dinner to the Chaussée des États-Unis to while away the time before going to bed. Ships and sailors, with the lights and sights and sounds of a busy port, have for him the fascination they exert over most men who lead rather sedentary lives. At that time in the evening, the Chaussée des États-Unis was naturally gay with the landsman's welcome to the sailor on shore. The cafes were crowded, both inside and out. Singing came from one, and the twang of an instrument from another, all along the quay. Soldiers mingled fraternally with sailors, and pretty young women, mostly bareheaded and neatly dressed in black, mingled with both. It was what a fastidious observer of life might call low, but Davenant's judgments had no severity of that kind. He looked at the merry groups, composed for the most part of chance acquaintances, here today and gone tomorrow, swift and light of love, with a curious craving for fellowship. From the gathering of friends he felt himself invariably the one shut out. It was this sense of exclusion that finally sent him away from the cheerful quay to wander down the jetty which marks the line where the harbour of grace, with its intricate series of basins and docks, becomes the sea. It was a mild night, though the waves beat noisily enough against the bastions of the pier. At intervals he was swept by a scud of spray. All sorts of acrid odours were in the wind, smells of tar and salt and hemp and smoke and oil, the perfumes of sea hazard and romance. Pulling his cap over his brows and the collar of his ulster about his ears, he sat down on the stone coping. His shoulders were hunched, his hands hung between his knees. He did not care to smoke. For a few minutes he was sufficiently occupied in tracing the lines and the groupings of lights. He had been in Havre more than once before, and knew the Quai de Londres from the Quai de New York, and both from the Quai de Gilly. Across the mouth of the Seine he could distinguish the misty radiance which must be Trouville from that which must be Honfleur. Directly under his eyes in the avant-porte, the dim hulls of steamers and warships, fishing boats and tugs, lay like monsters asleep. There was no reason why all this should make him feel outside the warm glow and life of things, but it did. It did worse in that it inspired a longing for what he knew positively to be unattainable. It stirred a new impulse to fight for what he had definitely given up. It raised again questions he thought he had answered, and revised hopes he had never had to quench, since from the beginning they were in vain. Were they vain? In taking this form, the query became more insidious, more difficult to debate and settle once for all. To every argument there was a perpetual recurring, "Yes, but," with the memory of the instance when her hand rested in his longer than there was any need for, of certain looks and lights in her eyes, of certain tones and half-tones in her voice. Other men would have made these things a beginning, whereas he had taken them as the end. He had taken them as the end by a foregone conclusion. They meant so much to him that he couldn't conceive of asking more, when perhaps they were nothing but the first fruits. The wind increased in violence. The spray was salt on his moustache and clung to the nap of his clothing. The radiance that marked Trouville and Honfleur grew dim almost to extinction. Along the quay the cafes began to diminish the number of their lights. The cheerful groups broke up, strolling home to the mansard or to the forecastle, with bursts of drunken or drowsy song. Davenant continued to sit crouched, huddled, bowed. He ceased to argue, or to follow the conflict between self-interest and duty, or to put up a fight of any kind. He was content to sit still and suffer. In its own way, suffering was a relief. It was the first time he had given it a chance since he brought himself to facing squarely the facts of his useless, pointless love. He had always dodged it by finding something to be done, or choked it down by sheer force of will. Now he let it rush in on him, all through him, all over him, flooding his mind and spirit, making his heart swell and his blood surge and his nerves ache and his limbs throb and quiver. If he could have formed a thought, it would have been that of the Hebrew psalmist when he felt himself poured out like water. He had neither shame for his manhood nor alarm for his pride, till he heard himself panting raucously, with a sound that was neither a moan nor a sob, but which racked him convulsively, while there was a hot smarting in his eyes. But in the end he found relief and worked his way out to a sort of victory. That is to say, he came back to see, as he had seen all along, that there was one clear duty to be done. If he loved Olivia Guion with a love that was worthy to win, it must also be with a love that could lose courageously. This was no new discovery. It was only a fact which loneliness and the craving to be something to her, as she was everything to him, had caused him for the moment to lose sight of. But he came back to it with conviction. It was conviction that gave him confidence, that calmed him, enabling him, as a clock somewhere struck 11, to get up, shake the sea spray from his person, and return to his hotel. It was while he was going to bed that Rodney Temple's words came back to him, as they did from time to time. Some call it God. I wonder if it is God, he questioned. But the misgiving that beset him as he motored out of Havre in the morning was of another kind. It was that which attaches to the unlikely and the queer. Once, having plunged into a country road away from railways and hotels, he felt himself starting on a wild goose chase. His assurance waned in proportion as conditions grew stranger. In vain, an obliging chauffeur, accustomed to enlighten tourists as to the merits of this highway, pointed out the fact that the dusty road along which they sped had once, and not so many years ago, been the border of the bed of the Seine, that the white cliffs towering above them on the left and edged along the top with verdure marked the natural brink of the river, and that the church so admirably placed on a hillside was the shrine of a martyred maiden saint, whose body had come ashore here at Graville, having been flung into the water at Harfleur. Davenant was deaf to these interesting bits of information. He was blind, too. He was blind to the noble sweep of the Seine between soft green hills. He was blind to the craft on its bosom, steamers laden with the produce of orchard and the farm for England. Norwegian brigantines, weird as the Flying Dutchman in their black and white paint, carrying ice or lumber to Rouen. Fishing boats with red or amber sails. He was blind to the villages, clambering over cliffs to a casino, a plage, and a Hôtel des Bains, or nestling on the uplands round a spa. He was blind to the picturesque wooded gorges through which little tributaries of the great river had once run violently down from the tableland of the Pays de Caux. He was blind to the charms of Harfleur, famous and somnolent on the banks of a still more somnolent stream. He resumed the working of his faculties only when the chauffeur turned and said, "Voilà, monsieur, voilà le château de Madame la Marquise." If it was possible for Davenant's heart to leap and sink in the same instant, it did it then. It leaped at the sight of this white and rose castle with its towers and donjon and keep. It sank at the thought that he, poor old unpretentious Peter Davenant, with no social or personal passports of any kind, must force his way over drawbridge and beneath portcullis, or whatever else might be the method of entering a feudal pile, into the presence of the chatelaine whose abode here must be that of some legendary princess, and bend her to his will. Stray memories came to him of Siegfrieds and Prince Charmings, with a natural gift for this sort of thing, but only to make his own appearance in the role the more absurd. Melchior le Danois had that characteristic which goes with all fine and fitting architecture of springing naturally out of the soil. It seemed as if it must always have been there. It was as difficult to imagine the plateau on which it stood without it as to see Mont Saint-Michel merely as a rocky islet. The plateau crowned a white bluff running out like the prow of a Viking ship into a bend of the Seine, commanding the river in both directions. It was clear at a glance that when Roger the Dane laid here the first stone of his pirate stronghold to protect his port of Harfleur, the salt water must have dashed right up against the chalky cliff, but the centuries during which the silt of the Vosges had been carried down the river and piled up against the rocks at its mouth had driven the castle inland for 1/8 of a mile. Melchior le Danois, which had once looked down into the very waves, now dominated in the first place a strip of gardens and orchards of small fruit, through which the road from Harfleur to the village of Melchior, half a mile further up the Seine, ran like a bit of white braid. Viewed from the summit of the cliff on which Davenant's motor had stopped, the chateau was composed of 2 ancient towers guarding the long and relatively low, relatively modern, brick mansion of the epoch of Louis XIII. The brick, once red, had toned down now to a soft old rose. The towers, once white, were splashed above the line to which the ivy climbed with rose and orange. Over the tip of the bluff and down its side of southern exposure towards the village of Melchior ran a park of oak and chestnut, in all the October hues of yellow and olive brown. But 10 minutes later, when the motor had made a detour round cliffs and little inlets and arrived at the main entrance to the chateau, Davenant found the aspect of things less intimidating. Through a high, wrought-iron grille, surmounted by the head of an armorial beast, he had the view of a Le Notre garden, all scrolls and arabesques. The towers, which at a distance had seemed part of a continuous whole, now detached themselves. The actual residence was no more imposing than any good-sized house in America. Davenant understood the chauffeur to say that Madame la Marquise l'avait modernisé jusqu'au bout des ongles. Having summoned up courage to ring the bell, he found it answered by a middle-aged woman with a face worn by time and weather to the polished grooves and creases to which water wears a rock. "On ne visite pas le château." She made the statement with the stony, impersonal air of one who has to say the same thing a good many times a year. Davenant pressed close to the grille, murmuring something of which he caught the word Madame. "Madame la Marquise n'est pas visible." The quick Norman eye had, however, noticed the movement of Davenant's hand, detecting there something more than a card. In speaking, she edged nearer to the grille. Thrusting his fingers between the curves of the iron arabesques, he said in his best French, "Prenez." Measuring time by the pounding of his heart rather than the ticking of his watch, it seemed to him he had a long time to wait before the woman reappeared, handing him back his card through the open work of the grille, saying briefly, "Madame la Marquise ne le croit pas." Perhaps it was the crestfallen look in the blonde giant's face that tempted her to add, "Je le regrette, monsieur." In the compassionate tone he read a hint that all was not lost. Scribbling under his name the words, "Boston, Mass, very urgent," he once more passed the card through the grille, accompanied by the manual act that had won the woman's sympathy in the first place. "Allez, please," he said earnestly, "and vite." He found his pencilled words effective, for presently the woman came back. "Venez, monsieur," she said, and she unlocked the grille with a large key carried beneath her apron. Her stony official manner had returned. As he drew near the house, a young man sketching or writing under a yew tree looked up curiously. A few steps farther on, a pretty girl in a leghorn hat, clipping roses into a basket, glanced at him with shy, startled eyes. In the hall where he was left standing, a young officer in sky-blue tunic and red breeches, who had been strumming at a piano in an adjoining room, strolled to the door and stared at him. A thin, black-eyed, sharp-visaged, middle-aged lady, dressed in black and wearing a knitted shawl, perhaps the mother of the 3 young people he had just seen, came halfway down the strip of red carpet on the stairs, inspected him, and went up again. It was all more disconcerting than he had expected. The great hall, of which the chief beauty was in the magnificent sweep of the monumental stairway, with its elaborate wrought-iron balustrade, struck him as a forbidding entry to a home. A manservant came at last to deliver him from the soft, wondering eyes of the young officer, and lead him into a room which he had already recognized as a library through the half-opened door. Here he had just time to get a blurred impression of portraits, busts, bull surfaces, and rich or ancient bindings, with views through the long windows of the traffic on the Seine, when a little old lady appeared in a doorway at the farther end of the room. He knew she was a little old lady from all sorts of indefinable evidence, in spite of her own efforts to be young. He knew it in spite of fluffy golden hair and a filmy, youthful mourning robe that displayed the daintiness of her figure as well as the expensiveness of her taste. She tripped rapidly down the long room, with quick little steps and a quick little swinging of the arms that made the loose gossamer sleeves blow outward from the wrists. He recognized her instantly as the Marquise de Melchior from her resemblance, in all those outlines which poudre de riz and cherry paste could not destroy, to the Guion type. The face would have still possessed the Guion beauty, had she given it a chance. Looking at it as she came nearer, Davenant was reminded of things he had read of those Mongolian tribes who were said to put on masks to hide their fear and go resolutely forth to battle. Having always considered this a lofty form of courage, he was inconsistent in finding its reflection here, the fear of time beneath these painted cheeks and fluffy locks, and the fight against it carried on by the Marquise's whole brave bearing, rather pitifully comic. Madame herself had no such feeling. She wore her mask with absolute nonchalance, beginning to speak while still some yards away. "Eh bien, monsieur." Davenant doubled himself up into a deep bow, but before he had time to stammer out some apologetic self-introduction, she continued, "You've come from Davis and Stern, I suppose, on business. I always tell them not to send me people, but to cable. Why didn't they cable? They know I don't like Americans coming here. I'm pestered to death with them. That is, I used to be, and I should be still if I didn't put 'em down." The voice was high and chattering, with a tendency to crack. It had the American quality with a French intonation. In speaking, the Marquise made little nervous dashes, now to the right, now to the left, as though endeavouring to get by someone who blocked her way. "I haven't come on business, my lady." He used this term of respect, partly from a frightened desire to propitiate a great personage, and partly because he couldn't think of any other. "Then what have you come on? If it's to see the chateau, you may as well go away. It's never shown. Those are positive orders. I make no exceptions. They must have told you so at the gate. But you Americans will dare anything. Mon Dieu, quel tas de baba!" The gesture of her hand in uttering the exclamation was altogether French, but she betrayed her oneness with the people she reviled by saying, "Quel tas de baba!" "I haven't come to see the chateau either, my lady." "You can call me madame," she interrupted, not without a kindlier inflection on the hint. He began again. "I haven't come to see the chateau either, madame. I've come to see you." She made one of her little plunges. "Oh, indeed, have you? I thought you'd learned better than that, over there. You used to come in shiploads, but—" He began to feel more sure of himself. "When I say I came to see you, madame, I mean I came to tell you something." "Then so long as it's not on business, I don't want to hear it. I suppose you're one of Walter Davenant's boys. I don't consider him any relation to me at all. It's too distant. If I acknowledged all the cousins forced on me from over there, I might as well include Abraham and Adam. Are you the first or the second wife's son?" He explained his connection with the Davenant name. "But that isn't what I came to talk about, madame, not about myself. I wanted to tell you of your nephew, Mr. Henry Guion." She turned with a movement like that of a fleeing nymph, her hand stretched behind her. "Don't! I don't want to hear about him, nor about my niece. They're strangers to me. I don't know them." "You'd like to know them now, madame, because they're in great trouble." She took refuge behind a big English armchair, leaning on the back. "I dare say it's what they were likely to come to. I told my niece so the last time she allowed me the privilege of her conversation. But I told her, too, that in the day of her calamity she wasn't to look at me." "She isn't looking to you, madame. I am. I'm looking to you because I imagine you can help her. There's no one else." "And had she sent you as her messenger? Why can't she come herself if it's so bad as all that? Or write? I thought she was married to some Englishman." "They're not married yet, madame, and unless you help her, I don't see how they're going to be, the way things stand." "Unless I help her? My good fellow, you don't know what you're saying. Do you know that she refused violently to help me?" He shook his head, his blue eyes betraying some incredulity. "Well, then I'll tell you. It'll show you. You'll be able to go away again with a clear conscience, knowing you've done your best and failed. Sit down." As she showed no intention of taking a seat herself, he remained standing. "She refused the Duc de Bataille." She made the statement with head erect and hands flung apart. "I suppose you have no idea of what that meant to me?" "I'm afraid I haven't." "Of course you haven't. I don't know an American who would have. You're so engrossed in your own small concerns. None of you have any conception of the things that really matter, the higher things. Well, then, let me tell you. The Duc de Bataille is, or rather was, the greatest parti in France. He isn't any more because they married him to a rich girl from South America or one of those places, brown as a berry, with a bust." She rounded her arms to give an idea of the bust. "Mais n'importe. My niece refused him. That meant, I've never confessed it to anyone before. I've been too proud, but I want you to understand. It meant my defeat, my final defeat. I hadn't the courage to begin again. C'était le désastre. C'était soudain." "Oh, madame." It seemed to him that her mouth worked with an odd piteousness, and before going on she put up a crooked little jewelled hand and dashed away a tear. "It would have been everything to me. It would have put me where I belong, in the place I've been trying to reach all these years. The life of an American woman in Europe, monsieur, can be very cruel. We've nothing to back us up and everything to fight against in front. It's all push and little headway. They don't want us. That's the plain English of it. They can't imagine why we leave our own country and come over here. They're so narrow. They're selfish, too. Everything they've got they want to keep for themselves. They marry us, the Lord only knows why, and 9 times out of 10 all we get for it is the knowledge that we've been bamboozled out of our own dough. There was Renée de Chartres who married that goose Annie Armstrong. They ridiculed her when she came over here, and at the same time clapped him on the back for having got her. That's as true as you live. It's their way. They would have ridiculed me if I hadn't been determined years ago to beat them on their own ground. I could have done it too if it had been worthwhile," he ventured. "You know nothing about it. I could have done it if my niece had put out just one little finger, when I got everything ready for her to do it. Yes, I got everything ready, and yet she refused him. She refused him after I'd seen them all, his mother, his sisters, his 2 uncles, one of them in waiting on the Duc d'Orléans, Philippe V, as we called him, all of them the purest old noblesse d'épée in Normandy." Her agitation expressed itself again in little dartings to and fro. "I went begging to them, as you might say. I took all their snubs, and oh, so fine some of them were, more delicate than the point of a needle. I took them because I could see just how I should pay them back. I needn't explain to you how that would be, because you couldn't understand. It would be out of the question for an American." "I don't think we are good at returning snubs, madame. That's a fact." "You're not good at anything but making money, and you make that blatantly, as if you were the first person in the world to do it. Why, France and England could buy and sell you, and most of you don't know it. Mais n'importe. I went begging to them, as I've told you. At first they wouldn't hear of her at any price. Didn't want an American. That was bluff, to get a bigger dough. I counted on it in advance. I knew well enough that they'd take a Hottentot if there was money enough. For the matter of that, Hottentot and American are much the same to them. But I made it bluff for bluff. No, I'm sharp. I manage all my own affairs in America, with advice. I've speculated a little in your markets quite successfully. I know how I stand to within a few $1,000s of your money. I offered 500,000 francs. They laughed at it. I knew they would, but it's as much as they get with a French girl. I went to $1 million. It's $1.5 million. To 2 millions. At 2 millions there will be, let me see, 5 into 20 makes 4, about $400,000 of your money. They gave in. Yes, they gave in. I expected them to hold out for it, and they did. But at that figure they made all the concessions and gave in. And did he give in? Davenant asked with naive curiosity. Oh, I'd made sure of him beforehand. He and I understood each other perfectly. He would have let it go at $1.5 million. He was next door to being in love with her besides. All he wanted was to be well established, poor boy. But I meant to go up to 2 millions anyhow. I could afford it. $400,000, Davenant said with an idea that he might convey a hint to her, would be practically the sum. I could afford it, she went on, because of those ridiculous copper mines, Hamlet and Tekla. I wasn't rich before that. My door was small. No Guion I ever heard of was able to save money. My father was no exception. You are in the Hamlet and Tekla? Davenant's blue eyes were wide open. He was on his own ground. The history of the Hamlet and Tekla mines had been in his own lifetime a fairy tale come true. Madame de Melchior nodded proudly. My father had bought nearly 2,000 shares when they were down to next to nothing. They came to me when he died. It was mere waste paper for years and years. Then all of a sudden, poof, they began to go up, and I sold them when they were near 1,000. I could have afforded the 2 millions of francs, and I promised to settle Melchior le Danois on them into the bargain when if I ever should, but my niece wouldn't take him, simply would not. Ah, she cried in a strangled voice, c'était trop fort. But did she know you were, what shall I say, negotiating? She was in that stupid England. It wasn't a thing I could write to her about. I meant it as a surprise. When all was settled, I sent for her and told her. Oh, monsieur, vous n'avez pas d'idée. Que scène. J'ai failli en mourir. She wrung her clasped hands at the recollection. That girl has an anger like a storm, avec tous ses airs traînés et descentes. She was terrible. Never shall I forget it. Jamais. Jamais. Au grand jamais. Et puis, she added with a fatalistic toss of her hands, c'était fini. It was all over. Since then, nothing. She made a little dash as if to leave him, returning to utter what seemed like an afterthought. It would have made her. It would have made me. We could have dictated to the Faubourg. We could have humiliated them. Like that. She stamped her foot. It would have been a great alliance, which I've been so much in need of. The Melchior, well, they're all very well. Old noblesse de la Normandie and all that. But poor, mes pauvres, and as provincial as a curé de campagne. When I married my poor husband, we won't go into that. I've been a widow since I was so high, ever since 1870, with my own way to make. If my niece hadn't deserted me, I could have made it. Now all that is past. Fini! The Clambertoy has set the Faubourg against me. They've the power too. It's all so intricate, so silent, such wheels within wheels. But it's done. They never wanted me. They don't want any of us, not for ourselves. It's the sou, the everlasting sou. Noble or peasant, it makes no difference. But if my niece hadn't abandoned me— Why shouldn't you come home, madame? Davenant suggested, touched by so much that was tragic. You wouldn't find anyone after the sou there. They're all about me, she whispered. The Melchior? They're all over the house. They come and settle on me, and I can't shake them off. They suffocate me, waiting for the moment when— But I've made my will, and some will be disappointed. Oh, I shall leave them, Melchior de Danois. It's mine. I bought it with my own money after my husband's death, and restored it when the Hamlet and Tekla paid so well. It shall not go out of their family, for my husband's sake. But, she added fiercely, neither shall the money go out of mine. They shall know I have a family. It's the only way in which I can force the knowledge on them. They think I sprang out of the earth like a mushroom. You may tell my niece as much as that, and let her get all the comfort from it she can. That's all I have to say, monsieur. Good morning. The dash she made for him seemed no more final than those which had preceded it. He went on speaking. I am afraid, madame, that help is too far in the future to be of much assistance now. Besides, I'm not sure it's what they want. We've managed to keep Mr. Henry Guion out of prison. That danger is over. Our present concern is for Miss Olivia Guion's happiness. As he expected, the shock calmed her. Notwithstanding her mask, she grew suddenly haggard, though her eyes, which, since she had never been able to put poudre de riz or cherry paste in them, were almost as fine as ever, instantly flashed out the signal of the Guion pride. Her fluffy head went up, and her little figure stiffened as she entrenched herself again behind the armchair. Her only hint of flinching came from a slackening in the flow of speech and a higher, thinner quality in the voice. "Has my nephew, only Guion, been doing things that would send him to prison?" In spite of herself, the final words came out with a gasp. "It's a long story, madame, or at least a complicated one. I could explain it if you give me the time. Sit down." They took seats at last. Owing to the old lady's possession of what she herself called a business mind, he found the tale easy in the telling. Her wits being quick and her questions pertinent, she was soon in command of the facts. She was soon, too, in command of herself. The first shock having passed, she was able to go into complete explanations with courage. "So that," he concluded, "now that Mr. Guion is safe, if Miss Guion could only marry the man she cares for, everything would be put as nearly right as we can make it. And at present they are at a deadlock. She won't marry him if he has to sell his property and so forth, and he can't marry her and live in debt to you. Is that it?" "That's it, madame, exactly. You put it in a nutshell." She looked at him hardly. "And what has all this got to do with me?" He looked at her steadily in his turn. "I thought perhaps you wouldn't care to live in debt to me either." She was startled. "Who? I? En voilà une idée." "I thought," he went on, "that possibly the Guion sense of family honour—" "Fiddle-faddle! There's no sense of family honour among Americans. There can't be. You can only have family honour where, as with us, the family is the unit, whereas with you the unit is the individual. The American individual may have a sense of honour, but the American family is only disintegrated mush. What you really thought was that you might get your money back." "If you like, madame. That's another way of putting it. If the family paid me, Miss Guion could feel quite differently, and so would Colonel Ashley." "When you say the family," she sniffed, "you mean me." "In the sense that I naturally think first of its most distinguished member, and of course the greater the distinction, the greater must be, shall I call it, the indignity of living under an obligation." "Am I to understand that you put up this money, that's your American term, isn't it, that you put up this money in the expectation that I would pay you back?" "Not exactly. I put up the money, in the first place, to save the credit of the Guion name, and with the intention, if you didn't pay me back, to do without it." "And you risked being considered over-officious?" "There wasn't much risk about that," he smiled. "They did think me so, and do." "And you got everyone into a fix?" "Into a fix, but out of prison." "Huh." She grew restless, uncomfortable, fidgeting with her rings and bracelets. "And pray what sort of a person is this Englishman to whom my niece has got herself engaged?" "One of their very finest," he said promptly. "As a soldier, so they say, he'll catch up one day with men like Roberts and Kitchener. And as for his private character, well, you can judge of it from the fact that he wants to strip himself of all he has so that the Guion name shall owe nothing to anyone outside." "Then he's a fool." "From that point of view, yes. There are fools of that sort, madame. But there's something more to him." He found himself reciting glibly Ashley's claims as a suitor in the way of family, position, and fortune. "So that it would be what some people might call a good match?" "The best sort of match. It's the kind of thing she's made for, that she'd be happy in. Regiments and uniforms and glory and presenting prizes and all that." "Ah, I shall have nothing to do with it." She rose with dignity. "If my niece had only held out a little finger." "It was a case, madame," he argued, rising too. "It was a case in which she couldn't hold out a little finger without offering her whole hand." "You know nothing about it. I'm wrong to discuss it with you at all. I'm sure I don't know why I do, except that—" "Except that I'm an American," he suggested. "One of your own." "One of my own? Quelle idée! Do you like him, this Englishman?" He hedged. "Miss Guion likes him." "But you don't." "I haven't said so. I might like him well enough if you got your money back." He smiled and nodded. "Is she in love with him?" "Oh, deep." "How do you know? Has she told you so?" "Yes, I think I may say she has." "Did you ask her?" He coloured. "I had to, about something." "You weren't proposing to her yourself, were you?" He tried to take this humorously. "Oh, no, madame." "You can't be in love with her, or you wouldn't be trying so hard to marry her to someone else. Not unless you're a bigger fool than you look." "I hope I'm not that," he laughed. "Well, I shall have nothing to do with it. Nothing. Between my niece and me, tout est fini." She darted from him, swerving again like a bird on the wing. "I don't know you. You come here with what may be no more than a cock-and-bull story to get inside the chateau." "I shouldn't expect you to do anything, madame, without verifying all I've told you. For the matter of that, it'll be easy enough. You've only to write to your men of business, or, which would be better still, take a trip to America for yourself." She threw out her arms with a tragic gesture. "My good man, I haven't been to America for 40 years. I nearly died of it then. What it must be like now!" "It wouldn't be so fine as this, madame, nor so picturesque, but it would be full of people who'd be fond of you, not for the sou, but for yourself." She did her best to be offended. "You're taking liberties, monsieur. C'est bien américain, cela." "Excuse me, madame," he said humbly. "I only mean that they are fond of you. At least, I know Miss Guion is. 2 nights before I sailed, I heard her almost crying for you. Yes, almost crying. That's why I came. I thought I'd come and tell you. I should think it might mean something to you, over here so long, all alone, to have someone like that, such a wonderful young lady wanting you in her trouble, and such a wonderful young man wanting his money back. Oh, I'm not blind, monsieur. I see a great deal more than you think. I see through and through you. You fancy you're throwing dust in my eyes, and you haven't thrown a grain. Pouf! Oh, la la la! Mais c'est fini. As for my niece, le bon Dieu l'a a bien puni. For me to step in now would be to interfere with the chastisement of Providence. The bon Dieu is always right. I'll say that for him. Good morning." She touched a bell. "The man will show you to the door. If you would like to stroll about the grounds, now that you've got in, well, you can." With sleeves blowing, she sped down the room as if on pinions. The manservant waited respectfully. Davenant stood his ground, hoping for some sign of her relenting. It was almost over her shoulder that she called back. "Where are you staying?" He told her. "Stupid place. You'll find the chariot door at Melcourt a great deal nicer. Simple but clean. An old chef of mine keeps it. Tell him I sent you, and ask for his poulard au riz." End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 21. What do you think of him? Ashley's tone indicated some uncertainty as to what he thought himself. Indeed, uncertainty was indicated elsewhere than in his tone. It seemed to hang about him, to look from his eyes, to take form in his person. Perhaps this was the one change wrought in him by a month's residence in America. When he arrived, everything had bespoken him a man aggressively positive with the habit of being sure. His very attitude now, as he sat in Rodney Temple's office in the Harvard Gallery of Fine Arts, his hands thrust into his pockets, his legs stretched apart, his hat on the back of his head, suggested one who feels the foundations of the earth to have shifted. Rodney Temple, making his arrangements for leaving for the day, met one question with another. "What do you?" "You know him," Ashley urged, "and I don't." "I thought you did. I thought you read him right off, as a cow-puncher." "He looks like one, by Jove, and he speaks like one, too. You wouldn't call him a gentleman, what?" "If you mean by a gentleman one who's always been able to take the best of the world for granted, perhaps he isn't. But that isn't our test, over here." "Then what is?" "I'm not sure that I could tell you so that you'd understand. At any rate, not unless you start out with the fact that the English gentleman and the American differ not only in species, but in genus. I go so far as to say that they've got to be recognized by different sets of faculties. You get at your man by the eye and the ear. We have to use a subtler apparatus. If we didn't, we should let a good many go uncounted. Some of our finest are even more uncouth with their consonants than good friend Davenant. They drop right out of your list, but they take a high place in ours. To try to discern one by the methods created for the other is like what George Eliot says of putting on spectacles to detect odours. Ignorance of this basic social fact on both sides has given rise to much international misjudgment. See? I can't say that I do. No, you wouldn't. But until you do, you won't understand a big, simple type. I don't care a hang about his big, simple type. What I want to know is how to take him. Is he a confounded sentimentalist, or is he still putting up a bluff? What difference does it make to you? If he's putting up a bluff, he's waiting out there at Michigan for me to call it. If he's working the sentimental racket, then I've got to be the beneficiary of his beastly goodwill. If he's putting up a bluff, you can fix him by not calling it at all. As for his beastly goodwill, well, he's a beneficiary of it too. How so? Because beastly goodwill is a thing that cuts both ways. He'll get as much out of it as you. Well, that's all very fine. It's very fine indeed for him. We've an old saying in these parts. By the street called Straight we come to the house called Beautiful. It's one of those fanciful saws of which the only justification is that it works. Anyone can test the truth of it by taking the highway. Well, friend Davenant is taking it. He'll reach the house called Beautiful as straight as a die. Don't you fret about that. You'll owe him nothing in the long run, because he'll get all the reward he's entitled to. When's the wedding? Fixed the date yet? Not going to fix one, Ashley explained moodily. One of these days, when everything is settled at Tory Hill and the sale is over, we shall walk off to the church and get married. That seems to be the best way, as matters stand. It's a very sensible way at all times, and I hear you're carrying Henry off with you to England. Ashley shrugged his shoulders. Going the whole hog. What? Had to make the offer. Olivia couldn't leave him behind. Anything that will make her happy will make you happy. That's about the size of it. Having locked the last drawer and put out the desk light, Temple led his guest down the long gallery and across the yard to the house on Charlesbank. Here Ashley pursued kindred themes in the company of Mrs. Vane, finding himself alone with her at tea. He was often alone with her at tea, her father having no taste for this form of refreshment, while her mother found reasons for being absent. "Queer old cove, your governor," Ashley observed, stretching himself comfortably before the fire. The blaze of logs alone lit up the room. "Is that why you seem to have taken a fancy to him?" "I like to hear him gassing. Little bit like the Bible, don't you know?" "He's very fond of the Bible." "Seems to think a lot of that chap, your governor." A nod, supposed to indicate the direction of the state of Michigan, enabled her to follow his line of thought. "He does. There's something rather colossal about the way he's dropped out." "A jolly sight too colossal. Makes him more important than if he'd stayed on the spot and fought the thing to the finish." "Fought what thing to the finish?" He was sorry to have used the expression. "Oh, there's still a jolly lot to settle up, you know." "But I thought everything was arranged, that you'd accepted the situation." He stretched himself more comfortably before the fire. "We'd a row," he said suddenly. "A row? What kind of row?" "A street row, just like two hooligans. He struck me." "Rupert!" She half sprang up. "He—" Ashley swung round in his chair. He was smiling. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she cried in confusion. "I can't think what made me call you that. I never do, never. It was the surprise and the shock." "That's all right," he assured her. "I often call you Drusilla when I'm talking to Olivia. I don't see why we shouldn't. We've always been such pals, and we're going to be kind of cousins." "Tell me about Peter." "Oh, there's nothing much that stands telling. We were two idiots, two silly asses. I insulted him, and he struck out. I call him a cad. I believe I call him a damned cad." "To his face?" "To his nose." "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." "And he got mad, by Jove." "Oh, it didn't last. We pulled off in a second or two. We saw we were two idiots, two kids. It wasn't worth getting on one's high horse about, or attempting to follow it up. It was too beastly silly for heroics. Except that he... "Except that he what?" "Except that he got the better of me. He has the better of me still, and I can't allow that, by Jove. Do you see?" "I don't see very clearly. In what way did he get the better of you?" "In the whole thing, the way he carried it off, the whole silly business." "Then I don't see what's to be done about it, now." "Something's got to be done, by Jove. I can't let it go at that." "Well, what do you propose?" "I don't propose anything, but I can't go through life letting that fellow stay on top. Why, considering everything, All he's done for Olivia and her father, and now this other thing, and his beastly magnanimity besides. He's frightfully on top. It won't do, you know. But I say, you'll not tell Olivia, will you? She'd hate it, about the row, I mean. I don't mind your knowing. You're always such a good pal to me. It was impossible to go on, because Mrs. Temple bustled in from the task of helping Olivia with the packing and sacking at Tory Hill. Having greeted Ashley with the unceremoniousness permissible with one who was becoming an intimate figure at the fireside, she settled to her tea. "Oh, so sad," she reflected, her little pursed-up mouth twitching nervously. "The dear old house all dismantled, everything to go. I've asked Henry to come and stay here. It's too uncomfortable for him, with all the moving and packing going on around him. It'll be easier for dear Olivia, too. So hard for her to take care of him, with all the other things she has on her hands. There's Peter's room. Henry may as well have it. I don't suppose we shall see anything more of Peter for ages to come. But I do wish he'd write. Don't you, Colonel Ashley? I've written to him 3 times now, and not a line from him. I suppose they must be able to get letters out there at Stoughton, Michigan. Can't be so far beyond civilization as all that. And Olivia would like it. She's worried about him, about his not writing, and everything. Don't you think, Colonel Ashley?" Ashley looked blank. "I haven't noticed it." "Oh, I have. A woman's eye sees these little things, don't you think? Men have so much on their hands, the great things of the world, but the little things, they often count, don't you think? But I tell dear Olivia not to worry. Everything will come right. Things do come right, very often. I'm more pessimistic than Rodney, that I must say. But still I think things have a way of coming right when we least expect it. I tell dear Olivia that Peter will send a line just when we're not looking for it. It's the watched pot that never boils, you know, and so I tell her to stop watching for the postman. That's fatal to getting a letter, watching for the postman. How snug you two look here together. Well, I'll run off and take off my things. No more tea, dear. I won't say good-bye, Colonel Ashley, because you'll be here when I come down." Mrs. Temple was a good woman, who would have been astonished to hear herself accused of falsehood, but as a matter of fact her account of the conversation with Olivia bore little relation to the conversation itself. What she had actually said was, "Poor Peter, I suppose he doesn't write because he's trying to forget." The challenge here being so direct, Olivia felt it her duty to take it up. The ladies were engaging in sorting the linen in preparation for the sale. "Forget what?" "Forget Drusilla, I suppose. Hasn't it struck you how much he was in love with her?" Olivia held a tablecloth carefully to the light. "Is this Irish linen or German? I know Mamma did get some at Dresden." Mrs. Temple pointed out the characteristic of the Belfast weave and pressed her question. "Haven't you noticed it about Peter?" Olivia tried to keep her voice steady as she said, I've no doubt I should have seen it if I hadn't been so preoccupied. Some people think, Rodney for instance, that he's lost his head about you, dear, but we mothers have an insight. Of course, there always seems to be one missing from the dozen of this pattern." "Oh, it'll turn up. It's probably in the pile over there. I thought I'd speak about it, dear," she went on, "because it must be a relief to you not to have that complication. Things are so complicated already, don't you think? But you haven't Peter on your mind. Why, that's one thing the less to worry about. If you thought he was in love with you, dear, in your situation, going to be married to someone else, but you needn't be afraid of that at all. I never saw a young man more in love with anyone than he is with Drusilla, and I think she must have refused him. If she hadn't, he would never have shot off in that way, like a bolt from the blue. But what's the matter, dear? You look white. You're not ill?" "It's the smell of lavender," Olivia gasped weakly. I never could endure it. I'll just run into the air a minute." This was all that passed between Olivia and Mrs. Temple on the subject. If the latter reported it with suppressions and amplifications, it was doubtless due to her knowledge of what could be omitted, as well as of what could have been said, had the topic been pursued. In any case, it caused her to sigh and mumble as she went on with her task of folding and unfolding and of examining textures and designs. "Oh, how mixy! Such 6s and 7s! Everything the wrong way round! My poor Drusilla, my poor little girlie! And such a good position! Just what she's capable of filling, as well as Olivia, better with all her experience of their army. "It is better to have loved and lost," dear Tennyson says, "but I don't know. Besides, she's done that already, with poor Gerald. Now to have to face it all a second time, my poor little girlie." As for Olivia, she felt an overpowering desire to flee away. Speeding through the house, where workmen were nailing up cases or sacking rugs, she felt that she was fleeing anywhere, to hide herself. As a matter of fact, the flight was inward, for there was nowhere to go but to her room. Her way was down the short staircase from the attic and along a hall, but it seemed to her that she lived through a succession of emotional stages in the 2 or 3 minutes it took to cover it. Her first wild cry, "It isn't true! It isn't true!" was followed by the question, "Why shouldn't it be true?" to end with her asking herself, "What difference does it make to me? What difference can it make to me?" She reached that form of the query by the time she took up her station at the window of her room to stare blankly at the November landscape. She saw herself face to face now with the question which, during the past month, ever since Davenant's sudden disappearance, she had used all her resources to evade. That it would one day force itself upon her she knew well enough, but she hoped too that before there was time for that she would have pronounced her marriage vows and so burned her bridges behind her. Amid the requirements of duty, which seemed to shift from week to week, the one thing stable was the necessity on her part to keep her promise to the man who had stood by her so nobly. If once it had seemed to her that Davenant's demands, whatever they might prove to be, would override all others, it was now quite clear that Ashley's claim on her stood first of all. He had been so loyal, so true, so indifferent to his own interests. Besides, he loved her. It was now quite another love from that of the romantic knight who had wooed a gracious lady in the little house at Southsea. That tapestry tale had ended on the day of his arrival at Tory Hill. In its place there had risen the tested devotion of a man for a woman in great trouble, compelled to deal with the most sordid things in life. He had refused to be spared any of the details she would have saved him from, or to turn away from any of the problems she was obliged to face. His very revolt against it, that repugnance to the necessity for doing it, which she was not at all times able to conceal, made his self-command in bringing himself to it the more worthy of her esteem. He had the defects of his qualities and the prejudices of his class and profession, but over and above these pardonable failings he had the marks of a hero. And now there was this thing. She had descried it from afar. She had had a suspicion of it before Davenant went away. It had not created a fear, it was too strange and improbable for that, but it had brought with it a sense of wonder. She remembered the first time she felt it, this sense of wonder, this sense of something enchanted outside life and the earth's atmosphere. It was at that moment on the lawn when, after the unsuccessful meeting between Ashley and Davenant, she had turned with the latter to go into the house. That there was a protective, intimate element in her feeling she had known on the instant. But what she hadn't known on the instant, but was perfectly aware of now, was that her whole subconscious being had been crying out even then, "My own, my own." With the exaggeration of this thought she was able to get herself in hand. She was able to debate so absurd a suggestion, to argue it down and turn it into ridicule. But she yielded again, as the voice that talked with her urged the plea. "I didn't say you knew it consciously. You couldn't cry, 'My own,' to a man whom up to that point you had treated with disdain. But your subliminal being had begun to know him, to recognize him as—" To elude this fancy, she set herself to recapitulating his weak points. She could see why Ashley should thrust him aside as being not a gentleman. He fell short in 2 or 3 points of the English standard. That he had little experience of life as it is lived, of its balance and proportion and perspective, was clear from the way in which he had flung himself and his money into the midst of the Guion disasters. No man of the world could possibly have done that. The very fact of his doing it made him lawfully a subject for some of the epithets Ashley applied to him. Almost anyone would apply them who wanted to take him from a hostile point of view. She forgot herself so far as to smile faintly. It was just the sort of deficiency which she had it in her powers to make up. The reflection set her to dreaming when she wanted to be doing something else. She could have brought him the dower of all the things he didn't know, while he could give her— But she caught herself again. What kind of a woman am I? She began to be afraid. She began to see in herself the type she most detested, the woman who could deliberately marry a man and not be loyal to him. She was on the threshold of marriage with Ashley, and she was thinking of the marvel of life with someone else. When one of the inner voices denied this charge, another pressed it home by nailing the precise incident on which her heart had been dwelling. You were thinking of this, of that, of the time on the stairs when, with his face close to yours, he asked you if you loved the man you'd be going away with, of the evening at the gate when your hand was in his and it was so hard to take it away. He has no position to offer you. There's nothing remarkable about him beyond a capacity for making money. He's beneath you from every point of view, except that of his mere manhood, and yet you feel that you could let yourself slip into that, into the strength and peace of it. She caught herself again, impatiently. It was no use. There was something wilful within her, something that could be called by even a stronger name, that worked back to the point from which she tried to flee, whatever means she took to get away from it. She returned to her work, persuading Cousin Cherry to go home to tea and leave her to finish the task alone. Even while she did so, one of the inner voices taunted her by saying, "That'll leave you all the more free to dream of him." Some days passed before she felt equal to talking about Davenant again. This time it was to the tinkling silver, as she and Drusilla Fane sorted spoons and forks at the sideboard in the dismantled dining-room. Olivia was moved to speak in the desperate hope that one stab from Drusilla, who might be in a position to deliver it, would free her from the obsession haunting her. There had been a long silence, sufficiently occupied, it seemed, in laying out the different sorts and sizes of spoons in rows of a dozen, while Mrs. Fane did the same with the forks. "Drusilla, did Mr. Davenant ever say anything to you about me?" She was vexed with herself for the form of her question. It was not Davenant's feeling towards her, but towards Drusilla that she wanted to know. She was drawing the fire to the wrong place. Mrs. Fane counted her dozen forks to the end before saying, "Why, yes, we've spoken of you." Having begun with a mistake, Olivia went on with it. "Did he say anything in particular?" "He said a good many things on and off. Some of which might have been in particular. All of them, if it comes to that." "Why did you never tell me?" "For one reason, because you never asked me." "Have you any idea why I'm asking you now?" "Not the faintest. I dare say we shan't see anything more of him for years to come." Did you refuse him? Did you send him away?" "Well, that's one thing I didn't have to do, thank the Lord. There was no necessity. I was afraid at one time that Mother might make him propose to me. She's terribly subtle in that way, though you mightn't think it. But she didn't. No, if Peter's in love with anyone, it's not with me." Olivia braced herself to say, "And I hope it's not with me." Drusilla went on counting. "Did he ever say anything about that?" Olivia persisted. Drusilla went on counting. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. "That's all of that said. What a lot of silver you've got, and some of it must have been in the family for thousands of years." "Yes," she added in another tone. "Yes, he did. He said he wasn't." Olivia laid down the ladle she was holding with infinite precaution. She had got the stab she was looking for. It seemed for a minute as if she was free, gloatingly free. He hadn't cared anything about her at all, and had said so. She steadied herself by holding to the edge of the sideboard. Drusilla stooped to the basket of silver standing on the floor in a seemingly passionate desire for more forks. By the time she had straightened herself again, Olivia was able to say, "I'm so glad of that. You know what his kindness in helping Papa has made people think, don't you?" But Mrs. Fane astonished her by throwing down her handful of silver with unnecessary violence of clang, and saying, "Look here, Olivia, I'd rather not talk about it any more. I've reasons. I can't take a hand in your affairs without being afraid that perhaps I shan't play the game." Olivia was silent, but she had much to think of. It was a few days later still that she found herself in Rodney Temple's little office in the Gallery of Fine Arts. She had come ostensibly to tell him that everything had been arranged for the sale. Lemon and Company think that early in December would be the best time, as people are beginning then to spend money for Christmas. Mr. Lemon seems to think we've got a good many things the smaller connoisseurs will want. The servants are to go next Tuesday, so that if you and Cousin Cherry could take Papa then, I'm to stay with Lulu's centner, and I shall go from her house to be married some day when everything else is settled. Do you know that before Mr. Davenant went away he left a small bank account for Papa, $2,000 or $3,000, so that we have money to go on with? Rupert wants to spend a week or two in New York and Washington, after which we shall come back here and pick up Papa. He's not very keen on coming with us, but I simply couldn't. He nodded at the various points in her recital, blinking at her searchingly out of his kind old eyes. "You look pale," he said, "and old. You look 40. She surprised him by saying with a sudden outburst, "Cousin Rodney, do you think it's any harm for a woman to marry one man when she's in love with another?" Before he had time to recover himself, she followed the question with a second. "Do you think it's possible for a person to be in love with two people at the same time?" He understood now the real motive of her visit. "I'm not a very good judge of love affairs," he said, after a minute's reflection. "But one thing I do know, and it's this, that when we do our duty, we don't have to bother with the question as to whether it's any harm or not." "We may do our duty and still make people unhappy?" "No, not unless we do it in the wrong way." "So that if I feel that to go on and keep my word is the right thing, or rather the only thing—" "That settles it, dearie. The right thing is the only thing, and it makes for everybody's happiness." "Even if it seems that it couldn't?" "I'm only uttering platitudes, dearie, when I say that happiness is the flower of right. No other plant can grow it, and that plant can't grow any other flower. When you've done the thing you feel you're called to do, the thing you couldn't refuse while still keeping your self-respect, well then, you needn't be afraid that anyone will suffer in the long run, and you yourself least of all." "In the long run? That means—" "Oh, there may be a short run. I'm not denying that. But no one worth his salt would be afraid of it. And that, dearie," he added, blinking, "is all I know about love affairs." There being no one in the gallery on which the office opened, she kissed him as she thanked him and went away. She walked homeward, taking the more retired streets through Cambridge and into Waverton, so as to be the more free for thinking. It was a relief to her to have spoken out. Oddly enough, she felt her heart lighter towards Davenant from the mere fact of having told someone, or having partially told someone, that she loved him. When, on turning in at the gate of Tory Hill, she saw a taxicab standing below the steps of the main entrance, she was not surprised, since Ashley occasionally took one to run out from town. But when a little lady in furs and an extravagant hat stepped out to pay the chauffeur, Olivia stopped to get her breath. If it hadn't been impossible, she would have said— But the taxicab whizzed away, and the little lady tripped up the steps. Olivia felt herself unable to move. The motor throbbed past her and out the gate, but she still stood incapable of going farther. It seemed long before the pent-up emotions of the last month or two, controlled, repressed, unacknowledged as they had been, found utterance in one loud cry. "Aunt Vic!" Not till that moment had she guessed her need of a woman, a Guion, one of her very own, a mother, on whose breast to lay her head and weep her cares out. The first tears since the beginning of her trials came to Olivia Guion, as, with arms clasped round her aunt and forehead pressed into the little old lady's furs, she sat beside her on a packing-case in the hall. She cried then as she never knew before she was capable of crying. She cried for the joy of the present, for the trouble of the past, and for the relief of clinging to someone to whom she had a right. Madame de Melcar would have cried with her, had it not been for the effect of tears on cosmetics. "There, there, my pet," she murmured soothingly. "Didn't you know your old auntie would come to you? Why didn't you cable? Didn't you know I was right at the end of the wire? There now, cry all you want to. It'll do you good. Your old auntie has come to take all your troubles away and see you happily married to your Englishman. She's put your dough in the pocket, same old dough, and everything. There now, cry. There's nothing like it." End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 22. For Madame de Melcourt, the chief novelty of American life, for the first few days at least, lay in the absence of any necessity for striving. To wake up in the morning into a society not keeping its heart hermetically shut against her was distinctly a new thing. Not to have to plan, or push, or struggle, to take snubs or repay them, to wriggle in where she was not wanted, or to keep people out where she had wriggled in, was really amusing. In the wide friendliness by which she found herself surrounded, she had a droll sense of having reached some scholastic paradise painted by Puvis de Chavannes. She was even seated on a kind of throne, like Justitia or Sapientia, with all kinds of flattering, welcoming attentions, both from old friends who could remember her when she had lived as a girl amongst them, and new ones who were eager to take her into hospitable arms. It was decidedly funny. It was like getting into a sphere where all the wishes were gratified and there was no more worlds to conquer. It would pall in the end. In the end she would come to feel like a gourmet in a heaven where there is no eating, or an Englishman in some blessed isle where there is no sport. But for the moment it offered that refreshing change which strengthens the spirit for taking up the more serious things of life again. In any case, it put her into a good humour, of which the residents at Tory Hill were the first to feel the effect. "Il est très bien, ton anglais." Olivia acknowledged the approval with a smile and a blush, as she went about the drawing-room trying to give it something of its former air. With the new turn of events it had become necessary to restore the house to a condition fit for occupancy. Madame de Melcourt had moved into it with her maid and her man, announcing her intention to remain till she got ready to depart. Her bearing was that of Napoleon making a temporary stay in some German or Italian palace for the purposes of national reorganization and public weal. At the present instant she was enthroned amid cushions in a corner of the sofa, watching Olivia dispose of such bric-a-brac as had not been too remotely packed away. "I always say," the old lady declared, "that when an Englishman is chic, he is very chic, and your Ashley is no exception. I don't wonder you're in love with him." When seated, the Marquise accompanied her words with little jerkings and perkings of her fluffy head, with wavings of the hands and rollings of the eyes, the correlatives of her dartings and dashings while on her feet. It was easy for Olivia to keep her back turned, while she managed to say, "He thinks you don't like him." Madame shrugged her shoulders. "I like him as well as I could like any Englishman. He's very smart. You can see at a glance he's someone. From what I've heard of him, his standing by you and all that, I was afraid he might be an eccentric." "Whom did you hear it from?" "Oh, I heard it. There's nothing wonderful in that. A thing that's been the talk of Boston and New York and telegraphed to the London papers. You don't suppose I shouldn't hear of it some time. And I came right over, just as soon as I was convinced you needed me." Olivia looked round with misty eyes. "I shall never forget it, Aunt Vic, dear, nor your kindness to Papa. He feels it more than he can possibly express to you. You're taking what he did so gently." "Ma foi, the Guions must have money. When it comes to spending, they're not morally responsible. I'm the only one among them who ever had a business head, and even with me, if it hadn't been for my wonderful Hamlet and Tekla. But you can see what I am at heart, throwing 2 million francs into your lap as if it were a box of bonbons." "I'm not sure that you ought, you know. And what about the Guion family honour and all that? Who's to take care of it if I don't? The minute I heard what had happened, I held up my head and said, 'Everything may go, so long as the credit of the Guion name is saved.' N'est-ce pas? We can't live in debt to the old man who advanced your papa the money." "He isn't an old man at all," Olivia explained quickly. "Ah, ça ne fait rien. His age isn't the question. I suppose he lent the money expecting us to pay him back at a handsome rate of interest." "No, he didn't. That's just it. He lent it to us out of—" "Yes, out of what?" "Out of pure goodness," she said firmly. "Fiddle-faddle. People don't do things out of pure goodness. The man who seems to is either a sentimentalist or a knave. If he's a sentimentalist, he does it for effect. If he's a knave, because it helps roguery. There's always some axe to grind." "I think you'll have to make an exception of Mr. Davenant." "Davenant, is that his name?" "Yes, I believe your papa did tell me so. The boy Tom Davenant's fished out of the slums." With some indignation, Olivia told the story of Davenant's birth and adoption. "So you see," she went on, "he has goodness in his blood. There's no reason why that shouldn't be inherited as much as insanity or a taste for alcohol. Stuff, dear. The man or the boy or whatever he is calculated on getting something better than he gave. We must simply pay him off and get rid of him. Noblesse oblige. We may get rid of him, Aunt Vic, but we can never pay him off. He'll be paid off, won't he, if we return his loan at an interest of 5, I'm willing to say 6%. Olivia came forward, looking distressed. Oh, I hope you won't, dear Aunt Vic. I mean about the 5 or 6%. Give him back his money if you will, and give it back in the princely way in which he let us have it. Well, I call that princely, 6%. Oh, please, Aunt Vic, you'd offend him. You'd hurt him. He's just the sort of big, sensitive creature that's most easily wounded, and— Tiens, you interest me. Stop fidgeting round the room and come and tell me about him. Sit down, she commanded, pointing to the other corner of the sofa. There must be a lot I haven't heard. If Olivia hesitated, it was chiefly because of her own eagerness to talk of him, to sing his praises. Since, however, she must sooner or later learn to do this with self-possession, she fortified herself to begin. With occasional interruptions from her aunt, she told the tale as she understood it, taking as point of departure the evening when Davenant came to dine at Tory Hill on his return from his travels round the world. So there was a time when you didn't like him, was Madame de Melcor's first comment. There was a time when I didn't understand him. But when you did understand him, you changed your mind. I couldn't help it. And did you change anything more than your mind? There was so much insinuation in the cracked voice that Olivia coloured, in spite of the degree to which she thought herself armed against all surprises. It was a minute or more before she was prepared with an answer. I changed my attitude towards him. Before that I'd been hostile and insolent, and then I grew humble. Yes, Aunt Vic, humble. I grew more than humble. I came to feel, well, as you might feel if you'd struck a great St. Bernard dog who'd been rescuing you in the snow. There's something about him that makes you think of a St. Bernard, so big and true and loyal. Did you ever think he might be in love with you? She was ready for this question, and had made up her mind to answer it frankly. Yes, I was afraid he was advancing the money on that account. I felt so right up to a few days ago. And what happened then? Drusilla told me he said he wasn't. Madame de Melcor let that pass. Did you think he'd fallen in love with you all of a sudden when he came that night to dinner? She resolved to tell the whole truth. I'd known him before. He asked me to marry him years ago. When something happened. I hardly know how to tell you. I didn't answer him. Didn't answer him? I got up and walked away, right in the middle of what he was trying to tell me. Tiens! And you had to take his money after all? Olivia bowed her head. Ça c'est trop fort, the old lady went on. You're quite right, then, when you say you'll never be able to pay him off, even if you get rid of him. But he's paid you off, hasn't he? It's a more beautiful situation than I fancied. He didn't tell me that. Olivia looked up. He didn't tell you? Who? Your papa, the old lady said promptly. It's perfectly lovely, isn't it? I should think when you meet him you must feel frightfully ashamed, don't you? I should if there wasn't something about him that— And you never get over it, the old lady went on pitilessly, not even after you've married the other man. The humiliation will haunt you, toujours, toujours, n'est-ce pas? If it were I should want to marry a man I'd done a thing like that to, just to carry it off. But you can't, can you? You've got to marry the other man. Even if you weren't so horribly in love with him, you'd have to marry him when he'd stood by you like that. I should be ashamed of you if you didn't. Of course, Aunt Vic. If you were to back out, that would be another thing. But as it is, you've got to swallow your humiliation with regard to this Davenant. Or rather, you can't swallow it. You've simply got to live on it, so to speak. You'll never be able to forget for an hour of the day that you treated a man like that, and then took his money, will you? It isn't exactly like striking a Sir Bernard who's rescued you in the snow. It's like beating him first and then having him come and save you afterward. Oh la la, quelle drôle de chose que la vie! Well, it's a good thing we can return his money at the least. You're so good about that, dear Aunt Vic. I didn't understand I was to have it when I couldn't see my way to marry Berteuil. That's all over and done with. I see you weren't made for life in the real world. Anyhow, she added, taking a virtuous air, When my word was passed, it was passed. Not that your dough will do you much good. It'll all have to go to settle the claims of this Mr. By the way, where is he? Why doesn't he come and be paid? He's out in Michigan, at a little place called Stoughton. Then send for him. I'm not sure we can get him. Cousin Cherry has written to him 3 times since he went away, and he doesn't answer. Cousin Cherry? What a goose! Who'd ever think she was the pretty Charlotte Hawke that Rodney Temple fell in love with? What's the matter with you over here, that you all grow old at a minute's notice, so to speak? I never saw such a lot of frumps as the women who used to be my own contemporaries. Rodney and I were very good friends once. If I could only have settled down in humdrum old Waverton. But we'll let bygones be bygones, and send for your man. I'll ask Cousin Cherry to write to him again. Stuff, dear, that won't do any good. Wire him yourself, and tell him I'm here. Oh, but Aunt Vic, dear. With little perkings of the head and much rolling of the eyes, the Marquise watched the warm colour rise in Olivia's cheek and surge slowly upward to the temples. Madame de Melchior made signs of trying to look anywhere and everywhere, up to the ceiling and down at the floor, rather than be a witness of so much embarrassment. She emphasized her discretion, too, by making a great show of seeing nothing in particular, toying with her rings and bracelets, till Olivia had sufficiently recovered to be again commanded to send for Davenant. Tell him I'm here, and that I want to have a look at him. Use my name so that he'll see it's urgent. Then you can sign the telegram with your own. Cousin Cherry, stuff! Later that day, Madame de Melchior was making a confession to Rodney Temple. Oui, mon bon Rodney, it was love at first sight. The thing hasn't happened to me for years. Had it been in the habit of happening? In the habit of happening, that's too much to say. I may have had a little tocard from time to time. I don't say no, of an innocence, or nearly of an innocence. Mais que voulez-vous? A woman in my position, a widow since I was so high, and exposed to the most flattering attentions. You know nothing about it over here. L'amour est l'enfant de Bohème, as the song says. Whatever you can say for Waverton and Cambridge and Boston, you'll admit? He leaned back in his rocking chair with a laugh. Oh, and does the best one can, Vic. We're children of opportunity as well as enfants de Bohème. If your chances have been more generous, and I presume more tempting, than ours, it isn't kind of you to come back and taunt us. Don't talk about tempting, Rodney. You can't imagine how tiresome those men become. Always on the hunt for money, always trying to find a wife who'll support them without their having to work. I speak of the good people, of course. With the bourgeoisie it's different. They work and take care of their families like other people. Only they don't count. If I hadn't money, they'd slam the door on me like that. She indicated the violence of the act by gesture. As it is, they smother me. There are 3 of them at Melchior-le-Danois at this present moment. Marie de Melchior's 2 boys and 1 girl. They're all waiting for me to supply the funds with which they're to make rich marriages. Is it any wonder that I look upon what's done for my own niece as so much saved? Henry's getting into such a hole seems to me providential. Gives me the chance to snatch something away from them before they... And when it's to go ultimately to him... The young fellow you've taken such a fancy to? You'd have taken a fancy to him, too, if you'd known only men who make it a trade to ask all and give next to nothing in return. You'd be smitten to the core by a man who asks nothing and offers all, if he were as ugly as a gargoyle. When he takes the form of a blond Hercules, with eyes blue as the Myosotis, and a moustache, moustache, and with no idea whatever of the bigness of the thing he's doing. It was the thunderbolt, Rodney, le coup de foudre, and no wonder. I hope you told him so. I was very stiff with him. I sent him about his business, just like that. She snapped her fingers. But I only meant it with reserves. I let him see how I had been wronged, how cruelly Olivia had misunderstood me. But I showed him, too, how I could forgive. She tore at her breast as though to lay bare her heart. Oh, I impressed him, not at all at once, perhaps, but little by little. As he came to know you. I wouldn't let him go away. He stayed at the inn in the village 2 weeks and more. It's an old chef of mine who keeps it, and I learned all his secrets. He thought he was throwing dust in my eyes, but he didn't throw a grain, as if I couldn't see who was in love with who, after all my experience. Ah, mon bon Rodney, if I'd been 50 years younger. And yet if I'd been 50 years younger, I shouldn't have judged him at his worth. He's the type to which you can do justice only when you've a standard of comparison, n'est-ce pas? It's in putting him beside other men, the best, even Ashley over there, that you see how big he is. She tossed her hand in the direction of Ashley and Drusilla, sitting by the tea-table at the other end of the room. Mrs. Temple had again found errands of mercy to ensure her absence. "Il est très bien, cet Ashley," the Marquise continued. "Chic, distinguished, no more like a wooden man than any other Englishman. Il est très bien. But what a difference! Two natures. The one a mountain pool, fierce, deep, hemmed in all around. The other the great sea. Voilà, Ashley et mon Davenant. And he helped me. He gave me courage to stand up against the Melchior, to run away from them. Oh, yes, we ran away. Almost. I made a pretext for going to Paris. The old pretext, the dentist. They didn't suspect at my age. How should they? Or they wouldn't have let me come alone. Elie or Paul or Anne-Marie would have come with me. Oh, they smother me. But we ran away. We took the train to Cherbourg, just like two eloping lovers, and the bateau de luxe, the Louisiana, to New York. Mais hélas!" She paused to laugh, at the same time to dash away a tear. "At New York we parted, never to meet again. So he thinks. His work was done. He went straight to that funny place in Michigan to join his pal. He's there now, waiting to hear that Olivia has married her Englishman, as you might wait to hear that sentence of death on someone you were fond of had been carried out. Ah, mon Dieu, quel brave homme! I'm proud to belong to the people who produced him. I don't know that I ever was before." "Oh, the world is full of brave fellows when the moment comes to try them." "Perhaps. I'm not convinced. What about him?" She flicked her hand again towards Ashley. "Would he stand a big test?" "He's stood a good many of them, I understand. He's certainly been equal to his duty here." "He's done what a gentleman couldn't help doing. That's something, but it's possible to ask more." "I hope you're not going to ask it," he began in some anxiety. "He strikes me as a man who would grant what was wrung from him, while the other, my blonde Hercules, gives royally, like a king." "There's a soul that climbs as by a ladder, and there's a soul that soars naturally as a lark. I don't know that it matters what they do, so long as they both mount upward." "We shall see." "What shall we see? I hope you're not up to anything, Vic." With another jerk of her hand in the direction of Ashley and Drusilla, she said, "That's the match that should have—" But the old man was out of his seat. You must excuse me now, Vic. I've some work to do." "Yes, be off. Only—" She put her forefinger to her lips, rolling her eyes under the brim of her extravagant hat, with an expression intended to exclude from their pact of confidence not only the other two occupants of the room, but everyone else. Olivia received the reply to her telegram. "Shall arrive in Boston Wednesday night." Considering it time to bring the purely financial side of the situation under discussion, Madame de Melchior explained to her niece that she, the Marquise, had nothing to do in her own person with the extraordinary person who was about to arrive. Her part would be accomplished when once she had handed over the dough either to Olivia or to her trustees. As the passing of this sum through Miss Guion's hands was to be no more than a formality, the question of trustees was not worth taking up. With the transfer of securities for the amount agreed upon from the one name to the other, a piece of business which would be carried out by Davis and Stern, the Marquise considered that she would have done all for which she could be called upon. Everything else concerned Olivia and her father and Davenant. Her own interest in the young man would be satisfied with a glance of curiosity. The brief conversation to this effect having taken place before luncheon, Madame de Melchior pursued other aspects of the subject with Colonel Ashley when that repast was ended and coffee was being served to them in the library. Olivia having withdrawn to wait on her father, Madame de Melchior bade him light his cigar while she herself puffed daintily at a cigarette. If she was a little grotesque in doing it, he had seen more than one elderly Englishwoman who, in the same pastime, was even more so. Taking one thing with another, he liked his future great aunt by marriage. That is, he liked a connection that would bring him into touch with such things in the world as he held to be important. While he had the scorn natural to the Englishman of the service class for anything out of England that pretended to be an aristocracy, he admitted that the old French royalist cause had claims to distinction. The atmosphere of it, clinging to one who was presumably in the heart of its councils, restored him to that view of his marriage as an alliance between high contracting powers, which events in Boston had made so lamentably untenable. If he was disconcerted, it was by her odd way of keeping him at arm's length. "She doesn't like me, what?" he had more than once said to Olivia, and with some misgiving. Olivia could only answer, "I think she must. She's said a good many times that you were chic and distinguished. That's a great deal for any Englishman from her. She acts as if she had something up her sleeve." That had become something like a conviction with him, but to-day he flattered himself that he had made some progress in her graces. His own spirits, too, were so high that he could be affable to Guion, who appeared at table for the only time since the day of their first meeting. Hollow-cheeked, hollow-eyed, his figure shrunken, and his handsome hand grown so thin that the ring kept slipping from his finger, Guion essayed, in view of his powerful relative's vindication, or so he liked to think of it, to recapture some of his old elegance as a host. To this Ashley lent himself with entire goodwill, taking Guion's timid claim for recognition as part of the new heaven and the new earth under process of construction. In this greatly improved universe, Olivia, too, acquired in her lover's eyes a charm, a dignity, a softened grace beyond anything he had dreamed of. If she seemed older, graver, sadder perhaps, the change was natural to one who had passed through trials so sordid and so searching. A month of marriage, a month of England, would restore all her youth and freshness. Nevertheless, he was glad to be alone with Madame de Melchor. It was the moment he had waited for, the moment of paying some fitting tribute to her generosity. He had said little of it hitherto, not wanting, as he put it, to drag it in by the hair of its head. He knew an opportunity would arise, and it had arisen. It was the sort of thing he could have done better had he not been haunted by the Englishman's fear of being over-demonstrative. He was easily capable of turning a nice little speech. Apart from the fear of transgressing the canons of negative good form, he would have enjoyed turning one. As it was, he assumed a stammer and a drawl, jerking out a few inarticulate phrases, of which the lady could distinguish only "so awfully good of you," and "never forget your jolly kindness." This being masculine, soldier-like, and British, he was hurt to notice an amused smile on the Marquise's lips. He could have sworn that she felt the speech inadequate to the occasion. She would probably have liked it better had it been garnished with American flourish or French ornamentation. "She's taking me for a jolly ass," he said to himself, and reddened hotly. In contrast to his deliberate insufficiency, the old lady's thin voice was silvery and precise. Out of some bit of obscure wilfulness roused by his being an Englishman, she accentuated her Parisian affectations. "I'm very much delighted, Colonel," she said, giving the military title its 3 distinct French syllables, "but you must not think me better than I am. I am very fond of my niece, and of her father. After all, they stand nearer to me than anyone else in the world. They've all I've got of my very own. In any case, they should have made the money some day, when that is, I've made my will, n'est-ce pas? But what matters a little sooner or a little later? And I want my niece to be happy. I want a great many things, but when I've sifted them all, I think I want that more than anything else." Ashley bowed. "We shall always feel greatly indebted," he began, endeavouring to be more elegant than in his words of a few minutes earlier. "I want her to be happy, Colonel. She deserves it. She's a noble creature, with a heart of gold and a spirit of iron, and she loves me, I think."
"I know she does, by Jove."
"And I can't think of anyone else who does love me for myself." She gave a thin, cackling laugh. "They love my money. The bon Dieu has counted me worthy of having a good deal during these later years, and they're all very fond of it. But she's fond of me. I was very angry with her once, but now I want her to be happy with the man she's in love with. So when Mr. Davenant came and told me of your noble character—"
"The devil he did!"
Ashley sprang out of his chair. The cigar dropped from his limp fingers. In stooping to pick it up, he caught the echo of his own exclamation.
I beg your pardon,"
he began, when he had raised himself. He grew redder than ever. His eyes danced. "Ça ne fait rien, Colonel. It's an expression of which I myself often use the equivalent, in French. But I don't wonder you're pleased. Your friend Mr. Davenant made the journey to Europe purposely to tell me how highly you were qualified as a suitor for my niece's hand. When one has a friend like that—"
But he's not my friend."
"You surprise me, Colonel. He spoke of you with so much praise, so much affection, I might say. He said no one could be so worthy to marry my niece. No one could make her so happy. No one could give her such a distinguished position in the world. No one was so fine a fellow in his own person." He looked mystified.
But he's out there in Michigan."
She puffed delicately at her cigarette. "He stayed with me 2 weeks at Melchor-le-Danois. That is, he stayed at the inn in the village. It was the same thing. I was very angry with my niece before that. It was he who made me see differently. If it were not for him, I shouldn't be here." He travelled to France expressly to beg my help, how shall I say, on your behalf, in simplifying things, so that you and Olivia might be free from your sense of obligation to him, and might marry.
Did he say he was in love with her himself?
She ignored the hoarse suffering in his voice to take another puff or two at her cigarette. Ma foi, Colonel, he didn't have to.
Did he say—
He swallowed hard, and began again more hoarsely.
Did he say she was in love with him?
There was a hint of rebuke in her tone. He's a very loyal gentleman. He didn't.
Did he make you think?
What he made me think, Colonel, is my own affair. He jumped to his feet, throwing his cigar violently into the fire. For a minute or two he stood glaring at the embers. When he turned on her, it was savagely.
May I ask your motive in springing this on me, Marquise?
Mon Dieu, Colonel, I thought you'd like to know what a friend you have.
Damn his friendship! That's not the reason. You've something up your sleeve.
She looked up at him innocently. Have I? Then I must leave it to you to tell me what it is. But when you do, she added, smiling, I hope you'll take another tone. In France, men are gallant with women.
And in England women are straight with men. What they have to say, they say. They don't lay snares or lie in ambush.
She laughed. Quant à cela, Colonel, il y en a pour tous les goûts, même en Angleterre.
I bid you good-bye, madame.
He bowed stiffly and went out into the hall. She continued to smoke daintily, pensively, while she listened to him noisily pulling on his overcoat and taking his stick from the stand. As he passed the library door, he stopped on the threshold.
By gad, she's mine,
he said fiercely. She got up and went to him, taking him by the lapel of the coat. There was something like pity in her eyes as she said, My poor fellow, nobody has raised that question. What's more, nobody will raise it, unless you do yourself. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 23. Ashley's craving was for space and air. He felt choked, strangled. There was a high wind blowing, carrying a sleety rain. It was a physical comfort to turn into the teeth of it. He took a road straggling out of the town toward the remoter suburbs, and so into the country. He marched on, his eyes unseeing, his mouth set grimly, goaded by a kind of frenzy to run away from that which he knew he could not leave behind. It was like fleeing from something omnipresent. Though he should turn his back on it never so sternly and travel never so fast, it would be with him. It had already entered into his life as a constituent element. He could no more get rid of it than of his breath or his blood. And yet the thing itself eluded him. In the very attempt to apprehend it by sight or name, he found it mysteriously beyond his grasp. It was like an enemy in the air, deadly but out of reach. It had struck him, though he could not as yet tell where. He could only stride onward through the wind and rain, as a man who has been shot can ride on till he falls. So he tramped for an hour or more, finding himself at last amid bleak, dreary marshes, over which the November twilight was coming down. He felt lonely, desolate, far from his familiar things, far from home. His familiar things were his ambitions, as home was that life of well-ordered English dignity in which tomorrow will bear some relation to today. He felt used up by the succession of American shocks, of American violences. They had reduced him to a condition of bewilderment. For 4 or 5 weeks he had scarcely known from minute to minute where he stood. He had maintained his ground as best as he was able, holding out for the moment when he could marry his wife and go his way. And now, when ostensibly the hour had come in which to do it, it was only that he might see confusion worse confounded. He turned back towards the town. He did so with a feeling of futility in the act. Where should he go? What should he do? How was he to deal with this new extraordinary feature in the case? It was impossible to return to Tory Hill, as if the Marquise had told him nothing, and equally impossible to make what she had said a point of departure for anything else. If he made it a point of departure for anything at all, it could only be for a step which his whole being rebelled against taking. It was a solution of the instant's difficulties to avoid the turning to Tory Hill and go on to Drusilla Fane's. In the wind and rain and gathering darkness, the thought of her fireside was cheering. She would understand him too. She had always understood him. It was her knowledge of the English point of view that made her such an efficient pal. During all the trying 4 or 5 weeks through which he had passed, she had been able to give him sympathetic support just where and when he needed it. It was something to know she would give it to him again. As he told her of Davenant's journey to France, he could see her eyes grow bigger and blacker than ever in the flickering firelight. She kept them on him all the while he talked. She kept them on him as from time to time she lifted her cup and sipped her tea. "Then that's why he didn't answer Mother's letters," she said absently, when he had finished. "He wasn't there."
"He wasn't there, by Jove, and don't you see what a fix he's put me in?"
She replied, still absently, "I'm not sure that I do."
"He's given away the whole show to me. The question is now whether I can take it, what?"
"He hasn't given away anything you didn't have before."
"He's given away something he might perhaps have had himself."
She drew back into the shadow so that he might not see her colouring. She had only voice enough to say, "What makes you think so?"
"Don't you think so?"
"That's not a fair question."
"It's a vital one."
"To you, yes, but—"
"But not to you. Oh, I understand that well enough. But you've been such a good pal that I thought you might help me to see—"
"I'm afraid I can't help you to see anything. If I were to try, I might mislead you."
"But you must know, by Jove. 2 women can't be such pals as Olivia and you."
"If I did know, I shouldn't tell you. It's something you should find out for yourself."
"Find out? I've asked her."
"Well, if she's told you, isn't that enough?"
"It would be enough in England, but here, where words don't seem to have the same meaning as they do anywhere else, and surprises are sprung on you, and people have queer, complicated motives, and do preposterous, unexpected things."
"Peter's going to see old Cousin Vic might be unexpected, but I don't think you can call it preposterous."
"It's preposterous to have another man racing about the world trying to do you good, by Jove."
"He wasn't trying to do you good so much as not to do you harm. He thought he'd done that, apparently, by interfering with Cousin Henry's affairs in the first place. His asking the old Marquise to come to the rescue was only an attempt to make things easier for you."
He sprang to his feet. "And he's got me where I must either call his bluff or accept his beastly sacrifice."
He tugged fiercely, first at one end, then at the other, of the bristling horizontal moustache. Drusilla tried to speak calmly. "He's not making a sacrifice if there was nothing for him to give up."
"That's what I must find out."
She considered it only loyal to say, "It's well to remember that in making the attempt you may do more harm than good. Where the apple reddens, never pry, lest we lose our Edens. You know the warning."
"Yes, I know. That's Browning. In other words, it means, let well enough alone."
"Which isn't bad advice, you know."
"Which isn't bad advice, except in love. Love won't put up with reserves. It must have all, or it will take nothing."
He dropped into a low chair at the corner of the hearth. Wielding the poker in both hands, he knocked sparks idly from a smouldering log. It was some minutes before she ventured to say, "And suppose you discovered that you couldn't get all?"
"I've thought that out. I should go home and ask to be allowed to join the first punitive expedition sent out, one of those jolly little parties from which they don't expect more than half the number to come back. There's one just starting now, against the Carrolls up on the Tibet frontier. Dare say I could catch it."
Again some minutes went by before she said, "Is it as bad as all that?"
"It's as bad as all that."
She got up because she could no longer sit still. His pain was almost more than she could bear. At the moment she would have given life just to be allowed to lay her hand soothingly on his shoulder, or to stroke his bowed head. As it was, she could barely give herself the privilege of taking one step toward him, and even in doing this she was compelled to keep behind him, lest she should betray herself in the approach. "Couldn't I—" The offer of help was in the tone, in its timid beseeching. He understood it, and shook his head without looking up.
"No," he said briefly. "No. No one can."
She remained standing behind him because she hadn't the strength to go away. He continued to knock sparks from the log. Repulsed from the sphere of his suffering, she was thrown back on her own. She wondered how long she should stand there, how long he would sit, bending like that, over the dying fire. It was the most intolerable minute of her life, and yet he didn't know it.
Just for the instant she resented that. The body could get the relief of openness and speech. She must be condemned forever to shame and silence. If she could have thrown herself on her knees beside him and flung her arms about his neck, crying, "I love you, I love you, whoever doesn't, I do, I do," she would have felt that life had reached fruition. The minutes became more unendurable. In sheer self-defence she was obliged to move, to say something, to break the tensity of the strain. One step, the single step by which she had dared to draw nearer him, stretching out yearning hands towards him, one step sufficed to take her back to the world of conventionalities and commonplaces, where the heart's aching is taboo. She must say something, no matter what, and the words that came out were, "Won't you have another cup of tea?" He shook his head, still without looking up. "Thanks, no." But she was back again on her own ground, back from the land of enchantment and anguish. It was like returning to an empty home after a journey of poignant romance. She was mistress of herself again, mistress of her secret and her loneliness. She could command her voice, too. She could hear herself saying, as if someone else were speaking from the other side of the room, "It seems to me you take it too tragically to begin with."
"It isn't to begin with. I saw there was a screw loose from the first, and since then someone has told me that she was half in love with him, by Jove, as it was." She remained standing beside the tea-table.
"That must have been Cousin Henry. He'd have a motive in thinking so, not so much to deceive you as to deceive himself. But if it's of any comfort to you to know it, I've talked to them both. I suppose they spoke to me confidentially, and I haven't felt justified in betraying them. But rather than see you suffer—" He put the poker in its place among the firearms and swung round in his chair towards her.
"Oh, I say, it isn't suffering, you know. That is, it isn't—"
She smiled feebly. "Oh, I know what it is. You don't have to explain. But I'll tell you. I asked Peter, or practically asked him, some time ago, if he was in love with her, and he said he wasn't." His face brightened.
"Did he, by Jove?"
"And when I told her that, the other day, she said—"
Yes, she said—"
She didn't put it in so many words, but she gave me to understand, or tried to give me to understand, that it was a relief to her, because in that case she wasn't obliged to have him on her mind. A woman has those things on her mind, you know, about one man when she loves another." He jumped up.
"I say, you're a good pal. I shall never forget it."
He came toward her, but she stepped back at his approach. She was more sure of herself in the shadow. "Oh, it's nothing."
"You see," he tried to explain, "it's this way with me. I've made it a rule in my life to do, well, a little more than the right thing, to do the high thing, if you understand. And that fellow has a way of getting so damnably on top. I can't allow it, you know. I told you so the other day."
"You mean, if he does something fine, you must do something finer?"
He winced at this. "I can't go on swallowing his beastly favours, don't you see? And hang it all, if he is my rival, he must have a show."
"And how are you going to give him a show if he won't take it?" He started to pace up and down the room.
"That's your beastly America, where everything goes by freaks, where everything is queer and inconsequent and tortuous, and you can't pin anyone down."
"It seems to me, on the contrary, that you have everyone pinned down. You've got everything your own way, and yet you aren't satisfied. Peter has taken himself off. Old Cousin Vic has paid the debts, and Olivia is ready to go to church and marry you on the first convenient day. What more can you ask?"
"Well, that's what she said, by Jove, the old Marquise. She said the question would never be raised unless I raised it."
Drusilla tried to laugh. "Eh bien," as she'd say herself. He paused in front of her.
"Eh bien, there is something else. And,"
he added, tapping his forehead sharply,
"I'll be hanged if I know what it is."
She was about to say something more when the sound of the shutting of the street door stopped her. There was much puffing and stamping, with shouts for Jane to come and take an umbrella.
"I say, that's your governor. I'll go and talk to him."
He went without another look at her. She steadied herself with the tips of her fingers on the tea-table in order not to swoon. She knew she wouldn't swoon. She only felt like it, or like dying. But all she could do was limply to pour herself out an extra cup of tea and drink it.
In the library, Ashley was taking heart of grace. He'd come to ask advice, but he was really pointing out the things that were in his favour. He repeated Drusilla's summing up of them, almost word for word. "You see, as far as that goes, I've everything my own way. No question will be raised unless I raise it. The fellow has taken himself off. The Marquise has most generally assumed the family liabilities, and Olivia is ready to come to church with me and be married on the first convenient day. I should be satisfied with that, now shouldn't I?" The old man nodded. "Your difficulties do seem to have been smoothed out." He sat, fitting the tips of his fingers together and swinging his leg in his desk chair. The light of the green-shaded desk lamp alone lit up the room. In the semi-obscurity, porcelains and potteries gleamed like crystals in a cave. Ashley paced the floor, emerging from minute to minute out of the gloom into the radiance of the lamp. "I'm not called on to go poking behind things to see what's there, now am I?" "Not in the least. I'm willing to consider everyone, and I think I do. But there are limits, by Jove. Now, really." "The minute we recognise limits, it's our duty not to go beyond them. It's thus far and no farther, for the man who knows the stretch of his tether, at any rate. The trouble with Peter is that his tether is elastic. It'll spin out as far as he sees the need to go. For the rest of us, there are limits, as you say, but about him there's something you might call limitless." Ashley rounded sharply. "You mean he's so big that no one can be bigger?" "Not exactly. I mean that very few of us need to be as big as that. It's all very well for him, but most of us have to keep within the measure of our own capacity." "And sit down under him while he looms up into God knows where?" "Well, wouldn't that be your idea?" "Can't say that it is. My idea is that when I take my rights and keep them, I'm as big as anyone." "Quite so. As big as anyone who takes his rights and keeps them. That's very true." Ashley stopped, one hand behind him, the other supporting him as he leaned on the desk. "And that's what I propose to do," he said aggressively. "It's a very high ideal." "I propose to accept the status quo without asking any more questions." "I should think that would be a very good plan. A wise man, one of the wisest, wrote, apropos of well-disposed people who were seeking a standard of conduct, 'Happy is he that condemneth not himself in that thing which he alloweth.' I should think you've had every reason for that kind of self-approval." "Do you mean that, sir? Or are you trying it on?" "I'm certainly not trying it on. The man who takes his rights and keeps them can be amply justified. If there's a counsel of perfection that goes beyond that standard, well, it isn't given to all men to receive it." "Then you think it isn't given to me? You put me down as a good sort of chap who comes in second best." "What makes you think I should do that?" Because, oh, hang it all, if I let this fellow keep ahead of me, why, I should come in second best." "You say keep ahead of me. Do you think he's ahead of you now?" Ashley straightened himself. He looked uncomfortable. "He's got a pull, by Jove. He made that journey to France and cracked me up to the Marquise and wheedled her round, when all the while he must have known that he was hammering nails into his own coffin. He did it too after I'd insulted him, and we'd had a row." "Oh, that's nothing. To a fellow like him, that sort of thing comes easy." "It wouldn't come easy to me, by Jove." "Then it would be all the more to your credit if you ever did anything of the kind." The Englishman bounded away. Once more he began to pace the floor restlessly. The old man took his pipe from a tray and his tobacco pouch from a drawer. Having filled the bowl with meditative leisure, he looked round for a match. "Got a light?" Ashley struck a vesta on the edge of his matchbox and applied it to the old man's pipe. "Should you say," he asked, while doing it, "that I ought to attempt anything in that line?" "Certainly not, unless you want to get ahead." "I don't want to stay behind." "Then it's for you to judge, my son." Something like an affectionate stress on the two concluding monosyllables. Ashley backed off out of the lamplight. "It's this way," he exclaimed stammeringly. "I'm a British officer and gentleman. I'm a little more than that, since I'm a V.C. man, and a fellow, dash it all, I might as well say it, I'm a fellow they've got their eye on in the line of high office, don't you know? Let a chap like that make me a present of all his chances." "Did he have any?"
Ashley hesitated. "Before God, sir, I don't know, but I'm inclined to think he had. If so, I suppose they're of as much value to him as mine to me. But not of any more." He hesitated again. "I don't know about that. Perhaps they are. The Lord knows I don't say that lightly, for mine are— well, we needn't go into that. But I've got a good deal in my life, and I don't imagine that he, poor devil— Oh, don't worry. A rich soil is never barren. When nothing is planted in it, nature uses it for flowers." Ashley answered restively. "I see, sir, your sympathies are all on his side." "Not at all. Quite the contrary. My certainties are on his side. My sympathies are on yours." "Because you think I need them?" "Because I think you may." "In case you should condemn yourself in the things you're going to allow." "But what's it to be?" "That's for you to settle with yourself." He was silent a minute. When he spoke, it was with some conviction. "I should like to do the right thing, by Jove, the straight thing, if only I knew what it was." "Oh, there'll be no trouble about that. In the street called Straight, my son, there are lights to show you the way." "Rum old cove," was Ashley's comment to himself as he went back to Boston. "Got an answer to everything." From the hotel he telephoned an excuse to Olivia for his unceremonious departure from Tory Hill. "Had an upset," was the phrase by which he conveyed his apologies, leaving it to her to guess the nature of his mischance. As she showed no curiosity on the point, he merely promised to come to luncheon in the morning. During his dinner he set himself to think, though, amid the kaleidoscopic movement of the hotel dining-room, he got little beyond the stage of mulling. Such symptoms of decision as showed themselves through the evening lay in his looking up the dates of sailing of the more important liners and the situation of the Corral country on the map. He missed, however, the support of his principal to be Rupert Ashley at his best. That guiding motto seemed to have lost its force owing to the eccentricities of American methods of procedure. If he was still Rupert Ashley, he was Rupert Ashley sadly knocked about, buffeted, puzzled, grown incapable of the swift judgment and prompt action which had hitherto been his leading characteristics. He was still beset by uncertainties when he went out to Waverton next morning. Impatient for some form of action, he made an early start. On the way he considered Rodney Temple's words of the previous afternoon, saying to himself, "In the street called Straight there are lights to show the way, by Jove. Gad, I should like to know where they are." Nevertheless, it had a clarifying effect on his vision to find, on walking into the drawing-room at Tory Hill, Miss Guion seated in conversation with Peter Davenant. As he had the advantage of seeing them a second before they noticed him, he got the impression that their conversation was earnest, confidential. Olivia was seated in a corner of the sofa, Davenant in a low chair that gave him the appearance of being at her feet. It was exactly the stimulus Ashley needed to bring his faculties into action. He was at once in possession of all his powers. The feeling inspired by the sight of them together transformed him on the instant into the quick, shrewd, diplomatic officer in whom he recognized himself. It was a feeling too complicated to be called jealousy, though jealousy might have been in it as an ingredient pang. If so, it was entirely subordinate to his new sense, or rather his old sense, of being equal to the occasion. As he crossed the room he felt no misgiving, no hesitation. Neither did he need to forecast, however rapidly, his plan of speech or action, since he knew that in urgent cases it was always given him. If he had to define this sudden confidence, he might have said that Rupert Ashley at his best had been restored to life again, but even that would not have expressed the fullness of his consciousness of power. He nodded to Davenant before shaking hands with Miss Guion. "Hello, back again." Davenant got up from his low chair with some embarrassment. Ashley bowed over Olivia's hand with unusual courtliness. He seated himself in the other corner of the sofa as one who had a right to the place. "I had to come east on business," Davenant explained at once. Olivia hastened to corroborate this statement. "Aunt Vic wanted Mr. Davenant to come to settle up all the things—" "And I had another reason," Davenant interrupted nervously. "I was just beginning to tell Miss Guion about it when you came in. I've a job out there, in my work, that would suit Mr. Guion. It would be quite in his line, legal adviser to a company, and would give him occupation. He'd be earning money and wouldn't feel laid aside, and if he was ill I could look after him as well as anyone. I'd like it."
Olivia looked inquiringly at Ashley. Her eyes were misty.
"Hadn't you better talk to him about it?"
Ashley said.
"I thought I'd better speak to you and Miss Guion first. I understand you'd offered to take him." "I shouldn't interfere with what suited him better, in any case. By the way, how did you like the Louisiana?"
Davenant's jaw dropped. His blue eyes were wide with amazement. It was Olivia who undertook to speak, with a little air of surprise that Ashley should make out such an odd mistake. "Mr. Davenant wasn't on the Louisiana. It was Aunt Vic. Mr. Davenant has just come from the West. You do that by train."
"Of course he was on the Louisiana. Landed on the... Let me see. She sailed again yesterday. Landed on the 20th, didn't you?"
"No, no," Olivia corrected again, smiling. "That was the day Aunt Vic landed. You're getting everyone mixed."
"But they came together," Ashley persisted. "He brought her, didn't you?"
The look on Olivia's face frightened Davenant. He got up and stood apologetically behind his chair.
You'll have to forgive me, Miss Guion," he stammered. I deceived you. I couldn't think of anything else to do."
She leaned forward, looking up at him. "But I don't understand what you did, as it is. I can't understand what anyone is saying."
"Then I'll tell you, by Jove. All the time you thought he was out there at Michigan, he was over in France, following up the Marquise. Tracked her like a bloodhound, what? Told her the whole story, how we got a deadlock and everything. Made her think that unless she came and bailed us out, we'd be caught there for the rest of our lives."
Olivia's eyes were still lifted to Davenant's. "Is that true?"
"It's true, by Jove, true as you live. What's more, he cracked me up as though I was the only man alive, so that when it came to a question of who was worthy to marry you, he wasn't fit to black my boots."
"No," Davenant cried fiercely.
"There was no question of me." "Bosh! Bosh, my good fellow! Bosh! Bosh, my good fellow! What a man does what you've done, there's no question of anyone but him."
The colour was hot in Davenant's cheeks, but he himself could not have told whether it came from astonishment or anger.
"Since Colonel Ashley knows so well what happened, I shall leave him to tell it."
He was about to make his escape when Olivia stopped him. "No, no, wait. Please wait. Tell me why you did it."
"I'll tell you,"
Ashley broke in. He spoke with a kind of nervous jauntiness.
"I'll tell you, by Jove. We had a row. I called him a cad. I called him a damned cad. There was a damned cad present on that occasion, only I didn't hit the right nail on the head. But that's not what I'm coming to. He struck me right in the teeth, by Jove. And when a man strikes you, it's an insult that can only be wiped out by blood. Very well, he's offered it, his blood. He didn't wait for me to draw it. I suppose he thought I wouldn't go in for the heroic. So of his own accord he went over there to France and shed his heart's blood in the hope that I might overlook his offence. All right, old chap, I overlook it."
With a laugh, Ashley held his hand up toward Davenant, who ignored it.
"Miss Guion," Davenant said huskily, "Colonel Ashley is pleased to put his own interpretation on what was in itself a very simple thing. You mayn't think it a very creditable thing, but I'll tell you just what happened, and you can draw your own conclusions. I went over to France and saw your aunt, the Marquise, and asked her to let me have my money back. That's the plain truth of it. She'll tell you so herself. I'd heard she was very fond of you, devoted to you, and that she was very rich and generous, and so I thought, if I told her exactly how matters stood, it would be a good chance to recoup myself for the loan."
Ashley sprang up with another laugh.
"He does that well, doesn't he?" he said to Olivia. "Come along, old boy," he added, slipping his arm through Davenant's. "If I let you stay here, you'll perjure your very soul."
Davenant allowed himself to be escorted to the door. Over his shoulder, Ashley called back to Olivia,
"Fellows are never good friends till after they've had a fight."
End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 24. When Ashley, after pushing Davenant gently out into the hall, returned to Olivia, she was standing by the mantelpiece, where the 5 Kangxi vases had been restored to their place in honour of the Marquise. "Rum chap, isn't he?" Ashley observed. "So awfully queer and American. No Englishman would ever have taken a jaunt like that after the old lady on another chap's behalf. It wouldn't go down, you know.
Olivia, leaning on the mantelpiece with face partially turned from him, made no reply. He allowed some minutes to pass before saying,
When I asked him how he liked the Louisiana, I wanted to know. I'm thinking of taking her on her next trip home.
She turned slightly, lifting her eyes. There was a wonderful light in them, and yet a light that seemed to shine from afar. Wouldn't that be rather soon?
It would give me time for all I want. Now that I'm here, I'd better take a look at New York and Washington, and perhaps get a glimpse of your South. I could do that in 3 weeks.
She seemed to have some difficulty in getting her mind to follow his words. I don't think I understand you. There was a smile on his lips as he said,
Don't you infer anything?
If I inferred anything, it would be that you think of going home alone.
Well, that's it.
She turned fully round. For a long minute they stood staring at each other. Time and experience seemed both to pass over them before she uttered the one word, Why?
Isn't it pretty nearly self-evident?
She shook her head. Not to me.
I'm surprised at that. I thought you would have seen how well we've played our game, and that it's up.
I don't see, not unless you're trying to tell me that your feelings have undergone a... He was still smiling, rather mechanically, though he tugged nervously at the end of his horizontal moustache.
Wouldn't it be possible, now that everything has turned out so beautifully, wouldn't it be possible to let the rest go without superfluous explanations?
I'm ready to do everything you like, but I can't help being surprised.
That must be because I've been more successful than I thought I was. I fancied that when I saw how things were with you, you saw how they were with me, and that...
Saw how they were with you? Do you mean... No, you can't mean... It isn't Drusilla. Since Drusilla would do as well as another, he still stood smiling. She clasped her hands. Her face was all aglow. Oh, I shall be so glad. It's only within a few days that I've seen how it was with... He hastened to interrupt her, though he had no idea of what she was going to say.
Then so long as you do see...
Oh, yes, I begin to see. I'm afraid I've been very stupid. You've been so kind, so noble, when all the while...
We won't discuss that, what? We won't discuss each other at all. Even if you go your way and I go mine, we shall still be...
He didn't finish, because she dropped again to the sofa, burying her face in the cushions. It was the first time he had ever seen her give way to deep emotion. If he had not felt so strong to carry the thing through to the end, he would have been unnerved. As it was, he sat down beside her, bending over her bowed head. He made no attempt to touch her. I can't bear it, he could hear her panting. I can't bear it.
What is it that you can't bear? The pain?
She nodded without raising her head.
Or the happiness? He asked gently.
She nodded again.
That is, he went on, pain for me and happiness about the other chap.
She made the same mute sign of affirmation.
Then perhaps that's just as it should be.
When Ashley got out to the road, Davenant was still standing by the gate, uncertain whether to turn back to the house or go away. Ashley continued to smile jauntily. If he was white about the temples and sallow in the cheeks, there was no one to notice it.
Miss Guion wants to see you, he announced to Davenant. It's about that matter of her father. I dare say you'll pull it off. No, not just now, he added, as Davenant started to go up the driveway. She's busy. Later will do. Say this afternoon. Come along with me. I've got something to tell you. I'm on my way to the temples.
Once more Ashley slipped his arm through Davenant's, but they walked on in silence. The silence continued till they were on the embankment, when Ashley said, On second thoughts, I shan't tell you what I was going to just now. That's all right, Davenant rejoined, and no more was said till they reached Rodney Temple's door.
Good-bye.
Ashley offered his hand.
Good-bye. You're a first-rate sort. You deserve everything you're coming in for.
Davenant could only wring the proffered hand wonderingly and continue on his way. Inside the house, Ashley asked only for Drusilla. When she came to the drawing-room, he refused to sit down. He explained his hurry on the ground that he was on his way to Boston to take the earliest possible train for New York.
Oh, yes, that's it, he said in answer to her dumb looks of inquiry. "It couldn't go on, you see. You must have known it, in spite of what you told me last night. You've been an out-and-out good pal. You've cheered me up more than a bit all the time I've been here. If it hadn't been for you— Oh, yes, I'm hit, but not hit so hard that I can't still go on fighting." "Not in the Carroll country, I hope?" "No. On second thoughts, that would be only running away. I'm not going to run away. Wounds as bad as mine have healed with a bit of nursing, and— Well, good-bye. Say good-bye to your father and mother for me, will you? Especially to your governor. Rum old chap, but sound as Shakespeare and the Bible. Good-bye once more. Meet again sometime." It was at the door to which she accompanied him that he said, "By the way, when are you coming home?" She called all her dignity to her aid in order to reply lightly. "Oh, I don't know. Not for ages and ages. Perhaps not at all. I may stay permanently over here. I don't know." "Oh, I say." "In any case, I'm here for the winter." "Oh, but I say, by Jove, that's forever. You'll be back before spring?" She weakened in spite of herself. "I couldn't possibly leave till after Christmas." "Christmas? It's the end of November now. Well, that's not so bad. Expect to be in Southsea some time early in the new year. See you then." He had gone down the steps when he turned again. Drusilla was still standing in the open doorway. "It's awfully queer, but I feel as if— You'll laugh, I know, but I feel as if I've been kept from the commission of a crime. Funny, isn't it? Well, I'll be off. See you in Southsea not later than the middle of January. Good-bye again. Don't forget my message to your governor." End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of The Street Called Straight by Basil King. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 25. It was late in the afternoon when Davenant reappeared at Tory Hill, having tramped the streets during most of the time since leaving Ashley in the morning. He was nervous. He was even alarmed. He had little clue to Olivia's judgment on his visit to the Marquise, and he found Ashley's hints mysterious. It was reassuring, therefore, to have her welcome him with gentle cordiality into the little oval sitting-room, where he found her at her desk. She made him take the most comfortable seat, while she herself turned partially round, her arm stretched along the back of her chair. Though the room was growing dim, there was still a crimson light from the sunset. He plunged at once into the subjects that had brought him, explaining the nature of the work her father would be called upon to do. It would be easy work, though real work, just what would be within his powers. There would be difficulties, some arising from the relationship of the Massachusetts bar to that of Michigan, and others on which he touched more lightly, but he thought they could all be overcome. Even if that proved to be impossible, there were other things he knew of that Mr. Guion could do, things quite in keeping with his dignity. "I've already talked to Papa about it," she said. "He's very grateful, very much touched." "There's no reason for that. I should like his company. I'm fond of him." For a few minutes she seemed to be pondering absently. "There's something I should like to ask you," she said at last. "Yes, Miss Guion, what is it?" "When people have done so much harm as we've done, do you think it's right that they should get off scot-free, without punishment?" "I don't know anything about that, Miss Guion. It seems to me that I'm not called upon to know. Where we see things going crooked, we must butt in and help to straighten them. Even when we've done that to the best of our powers, I guess there'll still be punishment enough to go round. Outside the law courts, that's something we don't have to look after." Again she sat silent, watching the shifting splendour of the sunset. He could see her profile set against the deep red glow, like an intaglio on sard. "I wonder," she said, "if you have any idea of the many things you've taught me?" "I?" He almost jumped from his seat. "You're laughing at me." "You've taught me," she went on quietly, "how hard and narrow my character has been. You've taught me how foolish a thing pride can be, and how unlovely we can make even that noble thing we call a spirit of independence. You've taught me how big human nature is, how vast and deep and good. I don't think I believed in it before. I know I didn't. I thought it was the right thing, the clever thing, to distrust it, to discredit it. I did that. It was because, until I knew you, That is, until I knew you as you are, I had no conception of it. Not any more than a peasant who's always starved on barren inland hills has a conception of the sea." He was uncomfortable. He was afraid. If she continued to speak like that, he might say something difficult to withdraw. He fell back awkwardly on the subject of her father and the job at Stoughton. "And you won't have to worry about him, Miss Guion, when you're over there in England," he said earnestly, as he summed up the advantages he had to offer, "because if he's ill, I'll look after him, and if he's very ill, I'll cable. I promise you I will, on my solemn word." "You won't have to do that," she said simply, "because I'm going too." Again he almost jumped from his chair. "Going too? Going where?" "Going to Stoughton with Papa." But Miss Guion." "I'm not going to be married," she continued, in the same even tone. "I thought perhaps Colonel Ashley might have told you. That's all over." "All over? How?" "He's been so magnificent, so wonderful. He stood by me during all my trouble, never letting me know that he's changed in any way." "Oh, he's changed, has he?" Because he sat slightly behind her, she missed the thunderous gloom in his face, while she was too intent on what she was saying to note the significance in his tone. "Perhaps he hasn't changed so much after all. As I think it over, I'm inclined to believe that he was in love with Drusilla from the first. Only my coming to the South Sea brought in a disturbing—" "Then he's a hound. I've begun to think better of him. I did think better of him. But now, by God, I'll—" With a backward gesture of the hand, without looking at him, she made him resume the seat from which he was again about to spring. "No, you don't understand. He's been superb. He's still superb. He would never have told me at all if he hadn't seen—" She stopped with a little gasp. "Yes, if he hadn't seen what?" That I care for someone else." "Oh, well, of course that does make a difference." He fell back into the depths of his chair, his fingers drumming on the table beside which he sat. Minutes passed before he spoke again. He got the words out jerkily, huskily, with dry throat. "Someone in England?" "No, here." During the next few minutes of silence he pulled himself imperceptibly forward, till his elbows rested on his knees, while he peered up into the face of which he could still see nothing but the profile. Is he coming to Stoughton?" "He's going to Stoughton. He's been there already." If there was silence again, it was because he dared not frame the words that were on his tongue. "It isn't. It can't be." Without moving otherwise, she turned her head so that her eyes looked into his obliquely. She nodded. She could utter no more than the briefest syllables. "Yes, it is." His lips were parched, but he still forced himself to speak. "Is that true? Or are you saying it because I put up the money?" She gathered all her strength together. "If you hadn't put up the money, I might never have known that it was true. But it is true. I think it was true before that, long ago, when you offered me so much, that I didn't know how to take it, and I didn't answer you. I can't tell when it began, but it seems to me very far back." Still bending forward, he covered his eyes with his left hand, raising his right in a blind, groping movement in her direction. She took it in both her own, clasping it to her breast, as she went on. "I see now, yes, I think I see quite clearly, that that's why I struggled against your help in the first place. If it had been anybody else, I should probably have taken it at once. You must have thought me very foolish. I suppose I was. My only excuse is that it was something like revolt, first against the wrong we had been doing, and then against the great sublime thing that was coming up out of the darkness to conquer me. That's the way I felt. I was afraid. I wanted something smaller, something more conventional, such as I'd been trained for. It was only by degrees that I came to see that there were big things to live for as well as little. It's all so wonderful, so mysterious. I can't tell. I only know that now—" He withdrew his hand, looking troubled. Are you sure? She reflected a minute. I know what makes you ask that. You think I've changed too suddenly. If so, I can't explain it. The silence in which he waited for her to continue assented in some sort to this reading of his thoughts. It isn't that I've changed, she said at last, speaking thoughtfully, so much as that I've wakened to a sense of what's real for me as distinguished from what's been forced and artificial. You may understand me better if I say that in leading my life up to recently I've been like a person at a play in which the situations are interesting and the characters sympathetic, but which becomes like a dream the minute you leave the theatre and go home. I feel that with you I've got home. He would have said something, but she hurried on. I've not changed towards the play except to recognise the fact that it was a play, for me. I knew it the instant I began to learn about Papa's troubles. That was like a summons to me, like a call. When it came, everything else, the things I've been taught to strive for, and the people whom I'm supposed to be the only ones worth living with, grew distant and shadowy, as though they belonged in a picture or a book. It seemed to me that I woke then for the first time to a realization of the life going on about me, here in my own country, and to a sense of my share in it. If I hadn't involved myself so much and involved someone else with me, my duty would have been clearer from the start. But Colonel Ashley's been so noble, he's understood me so well, he's helped me so much to understand myself, that I can't help honouring him with my whole heart, even if I see now that I never did care for him in the way. She pressed her handkerchief to her lips to keep back what might have become a sob. Did you know I loved you? He asked, still speaking hoarsely. I thought you must, she said simply. I used to say I hoped you didn't, but deep down in my heart. He got up and strode to the window, where, with his back to her, he stared a while at the last cold glimmer of the sunset. His big frame and broad shoulders shut out the light to such an extent that when he turned it was toward a darkened room. He could barely see her, and she sat sideways to the desk, an arm along the back of her chair. His attitude bespoke a doubt in his mind that still kept him at a distance. You're not saying all this, he pleaded, because you think I've done anything that calls for a reward. I said once that I should never take anything from you, and I never shall, and that it's something you give only because you can't help it. Her answer was quite prompt. I'm not giving anything or doing anything. What has happened seemed to me to have come about simply and naturally, like the sunrise or the seasons, because it's the fullness of time and what God means. I can't say more about it than that. If it depended on my own volition, I shouldn't be able to speak of it so frankly. But now, if you want me, as you wanted me once. She rose and stood by her chair, holding herself proudly and yet with a certain meekness. With his hands clasped behind him, as though even yet he dared not touch her, he crossed the twilight room toward her. Late that night, Henry Guion stood on the terrace below the Corinthian-columned portico. There was no moon, but the stars had the gold fire with which they shine when the sky is violet. Above the horizon a shimmering halo marked the cluster of cities and towns. In the immediate foreground the great elm was leafless now, but for that reason more clearly etched against the starlight, line on line, curve on curve, sweeping, drooping, interlaced. Guion stood with his head up and figure erect, as if from strength given back to him. Even through the darkness he displayed some of the self-assurance and stoutness of heart of the man with whom things are going well. He was remembering, questioning, doubting. I had come to the end of the end, and I prayed. Yes, I prayed. I asked for a miracle, and the next day it seemed to have worked. Was it the prayer that did it? Was it anyone's prayer? Was it anyone's faith? Was it God? Had faith and prayer and God anything to do with it? Do things happen by coincidence and chance, or is there a mind that directs them? I wonder.
End of chapter 25. End of The Street Called Straight by Basil King.